Chapter 1076. Above the scorched earth, demonic energy reverberated. The war demon descended. The demon head was awe-inspiring. The meeting of the two demons caused a shocking change in heaven and earth. The time has come. The two demon shadows silently looked at each other for a moment, and the demon head spoke first. Who wins and who loses? It's time to see the result. Win and lose? The war demon's voice sounded ethereal and creepy. See the result. He repeated the two key words in the other party's sentence with a questioning tone. Divinity depends on power. The demon head continued. Between you and me, only a battle can decide who is the god of the chaotic scorched earth. Oh. The war demon responded, paused for 2 seconds and continued. You blocked in front of me, just for such a boring thing? Boring? The demon head said coldly. Are you trying to escape? No, I just think you're very sad. The war demon replied. What did you say? It was the first time the demon head heard someone evaluate him like this in his life. If you want to be the god of the chaotic scorched earth, then go ahead. The war demon ignored the demon head's question and just continued. I am not a god. I'm a demon, the strongest demon in this time and space. As he spoke, he had already started walking forward again. I'm not interested in doing the kind of thing that occupies a mountain and becomes a king. That's what false gods and humans are passionate about. As the war demon spoke, he passed by the demon head. I also don't need to fight with a little demon of the second era like you to prove my position or power. When the leader of the demons heard these harsh words, he could only watch helplessly as the other party brushed past him. Throughout the whole process, the demon head wanted to attack the war demon several times, but he was restrained by an invisible pressure and couldn't move. Between you and me, who's strong and who's weak, you already know in your heart. The war demon continued to move forward without looking back. If you really think of yourself as a god in this long time, how can you allow the other three creatures in the same time and space to call themselves gods and occupy a place? He paused. In other words, since you have recognized three existences equal to you, then what position do you have to fight with me? The words of fighting demons were sonorous. When the demon chief heard this, he was speechless. At this moment, the leader of the demons finally understood. He was indeed lamentable. The difference between his realm and the war demons was too great. From the very beginning, the war demon had placed himself in the position of the strongest. He only attacked those who he recognized and who had the ability to pose a threat to him. As for the four pillar gods, the so-called gods, who restrained each other and competed for territory and benefits in coexistence, in the eyes of the war demon, they didn't even have the value to be defeated. Because they didn't think that they were the strongest. Wait. After a few breaths, the demon head finally spoke again. That's right. I really don't have the courage to take the initiative to start a war with the other three gods. Because I know very well, that would only bring about my own destruction. He turned around, looked at Do Mo's back and asked, But what I can't do, can you do it? Do you have a way to fight against the Master of Time, the Court of Truth, and the King of the Nether Abyss alone? If you don't, then your arrogance is just arrogance and stupidity. I see. At this moment the war demon stopped and muttered, You are not only lamentable, but also very ignorant. As soon as his voice fell, the demonic aura changed. The war demon's body didn't make any movements, but his attack had already been launched. The vast demonic aura surged and roared. The power was shocking and the ability to move the earth. The attack appeared for a moment and ended in a breath. When the demon chief came back to his senses, half of his torso had already disappeared. Facing the attack of the war demon, not to mention responding, the demon chief didn't even have any reaction. There are 3 reasons why you are still alive. The war demon looked down at the demon chief, who had fallen to the ground with a condescending gaze. First, I haven't found my eye yet. My current state is not good. Second, you are also a demon and have a certain resistance to the demonic aura. Third, and the most important point, I have shown mercy. The demon chief really couldn't move this time, but he could still speak. Why are you going to humiliate me and then kill me? I don't have the time for that, the war demon replied. I spared your life to answer your question earlier. He continued. Earlier, you asked me how to deal with the 3 small gods. Now I can tell you, just deal with them like this. After saying that, the war demon turned around and walked away. He didn't even look at the demon chief. At the same time, the loser alliance team, who were watching from afar, was undoubtedly shocked. What the? Teacher Xiao exclaimed. Am I seeing things? That strange black shadow instantly killed the leader of the demons? The strange shadow that you mentioned should be the legendary war demon, Hong Hu replied. What is that? Teacher Xiao asked again. Not only Teacher Xiao, but the other 3 members of the team also looked at Hong Hu with questioning eyes. Seeing this, Hong Hu pushed on his glasses and explained, I once heard from the Master of Time, in a period called the Primeval Age, there were 2 strongest existences in the main universe of Thriller Paradise. One was the supervising god, and the other was the war demon. He used his eyes to hint at the shadow in the distance. One day, a war broke out between the gods and demons. The 2 fought fiercely, and in the end, the war demon was sealed in a place called the Door to the Void. The supervising god was greatly injured, and in a crisis that could destroy the world, he was reduced to nothingness along with the whole era. So, Tired Dream continued, this person before us is a super powerful boss that has just broken out of the seal? When and how he escaped from the door to the void, I have no idea, Hong Hu said. But he is definitely strong. To be able to defeat the demon chief in an instant, he is indeed worthy of the title of strongest, Uncle Loser said. But I feel like he is a bit too strong, right? Is this the dusk of the gods or the second half of the gods? If every one of the 4 pillar gods ran into him, wouldn't he be able to take them all down one by one? That kind of thing is fine, Hong Hu said. You have seen his power. This kind of combat ability is obviously beyond the scope of strategy. If he really wants to take us down one by one, that is his freedom. In any case, I do not plan to be taken down by him. Then, he suddenly raised his hand and pointed at the demon chief in the distance. I think we should focus on that person now. Chapter 1077. On the other hand, Time Domain, above the Millennium Disk. The 5 members of Sengoku First Team were all teleported here. This was undoubtedly the territory of the Master of Time. And it was a private territory that even the Time officials rarely had the opportunity to visit. It belonged only to the Master of Time. From a distance, the Millennium Disk looked like a white disk. It covered an area as large as an island, and around this island, it was surrounded by the River of Time. The River of Time was naturally not a river composed of liquid. It was formed by an invisible, superdimensional substance. Even the Master of Time himself did not dare to touch the time flow casually. If some kind of creature fell into the time flow, the result could be imagined. All 5 people were teleported in. After the teleportation, Takashi Shin immediately looked at his teammates next to him and said, Is this a special rule of the finals? I don't think so. Takeda Tomo shrugged and replied, There was no notice before the game, and there was no mention of it during the loading process. How can there be such a rule? Well, Yusuji Hito also nodded and said, It is indeed strange that there is no introduction to the script. What's so strange about it? Oda AI didn't seem to think so. I think this is normal. The so-called finals, isn't it a battle to the death where the winner is king? Kill all the people in the other teams, and annihilate the guys who are in our way. This is the only rule. Seeing you so motivated, I feel a lot of pressure. At this time, the substitute player who accidentally entered the script, Sasaki, was already squatting on the ground with his arms around his knees. He looked at the floor with an expression of mourning. He was such a person who would feel extremely nervous and depressed as long as he encountered a little thing outside of the plan. However, even with such an obvious personality flaw, Sasaki could still occupy a place in the studio's first team, which was enough to show his extraordinary strength. Stop talking nonsense. At this time, Oda Ai was standing just behind Sasaki. When she saw the latter's appearance, she almost instinctively kicked him in the butt. Unexpectedly, ouch! Sasaki Akira was kicked down and fell on his face. Huh! In the next second, the whole Sengoku team realized something. Although Oda Ai's kick wasn't too heavy, it was probably just the strength of a fight between friends. But, logically speaking, this kind of action shouldn't be possible. Based on the normal limitation of the system, in the scenario world, other than the case of indiscriminate damage skill, the most harmful action that could be done between teammates was a light tap on each other's head or arm. Furthermore, when doing such an action, the user could not have the intention to harm the other party. To put it simply, actions that could cause more than 1% life points loss, no matter the intention, should not be done to teammate. However, no matter how he looked at it, Oda Ai's kick had already exceeded that limit. What's going on? Jishin's expression froze as he looked at Oda Ai and asked, "How did you do it? Even if you ask me that." Oda Ai was equally baffled. "I just wanted to do it. I didn't expect that I would actually be able to kick him." As the team's strategist, Takeda Ji was silent for a moment before he came up with a very constructive suggestion. "Let's try to beat Sasaki up." "Hey!" Sasaki was shocked. "Why me? If you want to do this kind of experiment, can't you just attack each other? Why are you ganging up on me?" Before he could finish, he was attacked from 4 different directions. There was no room for him to evade and he was beaten up. "You guys!" Sasaki lay on the ground, and his mournful face became even more sorrowful. "I'm under so much pressure. As expected, we are in a state where we can attack our teammates. The rules of this scenario sure are strange. In any case, we'll have to be careful during the battle." After the 4 of them finished fighting, they completely ignored Sasaki and began to discuss business with each other. At the same time, at the Court of Truth, this place had already become a mess of ruins. Like a haunted house that had been abandoned for a long time in a horror movie, the whole place was shrouded in an oppressive and lifeless atmosphere. However, at that moment there were still people in the courtroom. 12 figures were sitting on the tattered mattress. Even the judges' seats were filled to the brim. When Phantom Dawn recovered from the darkness of the teleportation, he realized that he was already standing on the defendant's stand in the courtroom. There were no teammates or other players around him. He had been teleported here alone, to this place that was feared by many in the main universe. Phew! Phew! Just as Phantom Dawn looked around him, a sound that sounded like a gust of wind came from behind him. Turning to the source of the sound, Phantom Dawn saw a creature completely covered in a black cape float onto the judge's stand. Dong! 2 seconds later, a clerk at the bottom of the judge's stand slammed the gavel in his hand and announced loudly, "Rise." As he finished, all the NPCs in the courtroom stood up. The first round of trial for Phantom Dawn is now in session. After he said that, the black cape on the judge's stand used a voice that sounded like Lord Voldemort with late-stage tuberculosis to continue. "Everyone, please take your seats." Facing this, Phantom Dawn, who sat on the defendant's stand, chose not to say anything. He waited to see what would happen. He placed 90% of his attention on the judge in the black cape. He did not pay much attention to the black shadows on the bench and the 100 or so NPCs behind him. After a short silence, the judge said, "Mr. Inspector, please come forward to give your statement." "Yes." A loud reply came from the left side of Phantom Dawn, and a figure stood up. Phantom Dawn turned to look and realized that the prosecutor was a humanoid creature in a tight black suit. His skin was light brown in color. Honorable Judge, members of the jury. The prosecutor nodded at the two groups of people. Please allow me to start my statement. Then, he picked up a document from the table and placed it before his eyes. Phantom Dawn had good eyesight. He could read the words on the document clearly, but unfortunately, he could not understand the meaning of the words. The defendant, Phantom Dawn, killed 11 officers between year 492 and 501. His motive was clear, his method was cruel, and the evidence was conclusive. The content of the prosecutor's statement did not surprise Phantom Dawn, because everything he said was the truth. Looks like, after this part of the plot, there's going to be a tough battle ahead. Phantom Dawn was not interested in the statement. At that moment, he was making use of the time to observe and think. If the battle started, how was he going to escape from this courtroom in one piece? Chapter 1078. The Kingdom of the Dead Spirits, King City. This was the castle of the King of the Abyss. At the same time, it was also his burial ground. Who would have thought that this king of the Kingdom of the Dead Spirits would become the first of the 4 pillar gods to fall in the twilight of the gods? The ones who made this happen were the 5 most powerful figures in the main universe. They were the Count of Script, Dienli King, Sam Montier, Duo Ling, and Taliom. In terms of combat power, the Count of Script was second only to the 4 pillar gods. After Lao Wang regained his strength, he was not any weaker than the 4 pillar gods. As for the other 3, they were all second in command of the 4 pillar gods. Sam Montier was once the strongest timekeeper, Duo Ling was the leader of the 9 heads of the dead spirits, and Taliom, the curse god officer, had always been the right-hand man of the leader of the demons. Even in terms of strength on the surface, the 3 mentioned above were of a higher level than the average magistrate, juror, and necromancer's 9 arches, not to mention, they had secretly established the Phantom Fiend Church and accumulated a large amount of faith power. Then, here was the question, why would the 5 of them work together to defeat the King of the Abyss? The answer was obvious. Feng Bujue was the mastermind behind this. Half a month ago, on the night of the second round of the semifinals, Brother Ju and the 3 from the Phantom Demon Church had already made a plan to eliminate the King of the Abyss. The key to this plan was Fu Ling, the former 9 heads of the dead spirits who had been sealed in the manure swamp of the Devil-Eating Island. According to Duo Ling, he and Fu Ling had fought for the position of the leader of the 9 heads of the dead spirit. Logically speaking, Fu Ling was slightly stronger, but Duo Ling was much more cunning. He used various methods to win over the support of the other 9 heads of the dead spirits. Therefore, Fu Ling lost, and the price of failure was eternal damnation. Many years later, under a coincidence, Feng Bujue released Fu Ling from the seal. And this became an opportunity. Even though she was imprisoned as a spirit, as long as there was strong resentment, her power would increase. Therefore, after all these years, not only did Fu Ling's strength not stagnate, it became even stronger. After Feng Bujue understood the history of the battle between Snatch Spirit and Fu Ling, he decided to go along with the plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain and kill the tiger with a borrowed knife. First, he ordered Seizing Spirit to lead the 9 chiefs to a designated location and wait for orders. Then, he used Seizing Spirit as bait to lure Fu Ling there as well. After the 2 sides met, there was no doubt that it would be a bloody battle of life and death. Meanwhile, Snatch Spirit himself stayed out of the matter. While Zhou Kuei and Fu Ling were fighting, he quickly met up with his other 2 colleagues from the Illusion Fiend Church. Then, he brought along Brother Zun and Lao Wang and headed straight for the palace. It didn't matter how Fu Ling's battle was going. After all, the 9 chiefs wouldn't be able to get away in a short period of time. So there were only a few shrimp soldiers and crab generals left to guard the royal city. In the face of those 5 ferocious fiends, small fries were of little use. Moreover, Soul Snatcher knew the situation of King City, the distribution of the troops, and so on like the back of his hand. With the help of both the inside and the outside, the undead army was basically defeated. Of course, the king of the netherworld abyss himself was also very strong. He wouldn't be defeated so easily. Among the four pillar gods, in terms of fighting one-on-one, the leader of the demons was the best. The king of the netherworld abyss was the second best. This god who controlled the power of the undead wasn't easy to deal with. However, the 5 people who came to surround him were not easy to deal with either. If the king of the netherworld abyss could still kill the 5 of them in a 1-on-5 battle, then he wouldn't need to cultivate the 9 chiefs of the dead souls. It was estimated that he wouldn't have a problem fighting 2 pillar gods alone. If he was smart enough, he could use some long-range and short-range tactics to swallow up the forces of the other 3 gods. Unfortunately, that was just a hypothesis. The reality was, when these 5 people, strictly speaking, none of them were human, appeared together, the king of the netherworld abyss already understood that he didn't even have half a chance of winning. In the end, this king of the kingdom of the dead souls chose to take a bow with dignity. He didn't make any pointless resistance or counterattack. He also didn't want to drag anyone down with him. He seemed to have his own unique view of death. There was no fear in his heart. On the contrary, he had a sense of relief and a sense of tiredness. The time had come and dusk was coming. His era was over. The stage of the new era would be left to the new rising forces. At the last moment, the king of the netherworld abyss took off the crown of the dead souls from his head and slowly placed it on the throne. Then, he turned around and disappeared. He returned to the torrent of data and became a part of this world. After he completely disappeared, Spirit Snatcher opened his mouth. Everyone. He glanced at the 4 people around him and asked in a deep voice, "Is there anyone who wants to take the throne?" The current Spirit Snatcher was no longer a huge skull that floated in the air. After swallowing the mushroom that Fong Bujua had given him, under the effect of the item's second effect, "I've added a mushroom for you," permanently changes the style of an NPC. Caesar's appearance turned into a human. But now, he looked like a human-shaped ice sculpture made of light blue ice crystals. Through his translucent ice skin and flesh, one could clearly see the human skeleton inside his body, as well as many blue light spots that were constantly floating in his body like fireflies. "Humph! You don't have to be so polite with us." Dianhai King still looked like a child, but his tone was not polite. "We have no interest in this throne to begin with. Haha. Regarding the ownership of the crown, you and Fong Bujua have already come to an agreement, haven't you?" The Count of Scrip's attitude was more mature. He smiled at Spirit Snatcher. "Why do you need to ask?" He paused, and a cold glint flashed through his eyes. "Could it be you're trying to test our reaction?" Spirit Snatcher did not answer this question. He did not seem to hear the latter half of the sentence. He turned back to look at Sam Montier and Taliome. The 2 had been in cahoots with him for many years, so naturally, they had no objections. Therefore, Spirit Snatcher took a step toward the throne. "Okay, since no one has any objections." Spirit Snatcher walked up the steps before the throne and said, "I shall ascend to this throne. From now on, all living beings will be insignificant. Lowly redemption. Hypocritical guidance. Cycle of despair. Everything shall cease to exist and be reborn from destruction. I." Spirit Snatcher mumbled as he walked. He reached before the throne and raised the crown of the dead. "Shall be crowned Chi." Just as Spirit Snatcher was about to put on the crown and say the word king, a ray of death shot at him. Instantly, the ray of energy knocked the crown from his hand to the ground. A cold female voice rang out at the same time. "You think you're worthy?" Chapter 1079. Why? When Duel Ling said that, his hand was pierced through by the beam of light, but he acted as if nothing had happened. In a low voice, he said, "Why would you appear here?" The moment he said that, his gaze fell to the end of the hall and he saw Fu Ling's figure. Aren't you very calculative? Fu Ling glared at Duo Ling and walked closer. Why don't you take a guess? You are very strong, but not at the level of the four pillar gods. Even if you were able to defeat the other Ling Kuei alone, it would still take a long time. Furthermore, it's impossible for you to come out unscathed after the battle. When he said this, his expression changed slightly. So, someone must have helped you. You guessed right. At that moment, another voice rang out and joined their conversation. Following that, a black stone that was floating in midair appeared before them. This stone was about 3 cubic meters in size, and its texture was similar to crystal. It had an irregular shape, and the surface of the stone was dotted with grayish-white patterns. Even though it looked like an inorganic object, in reality it was a living thing, and its name was Shapeless Demon. So, it's you. Duo Ling looked at Shapeless Demon, and there was regret in his voice. No. I should say, it is you. From Duo Ling's tone and expression, it was clear that he had been wary of Shapeless Demon for a long time. Of the 9 spirits, Shapeless Demon had always been the most mysterious. No one knew the limit of its power, and it never revealed its thoughts. In the past few years, Duo Ling had put Shapeless Demon in danger many times to test the power of this stone, but every time, Shapeless Demon would use ingenious methods to escape unscathed. It was practically invulnerable. After the last tournament for the best, you suddenly disappeared. Duo Ling paused for 2 seconds and then said to Shapeless Demon, "Today, you appear here and stand on Fu Ling's side. Could it be that you are a spy planted by her?" "Ha!" A condescending laugh came from the floating stone. His voice and tone were like a radio announcer's, warm and pleasant to the ear. "Duo Ling, do not underestimate things you do not understand. You do not have that kind of power and qualification." Hearing this, the expressions of the Count of Script and Dian Lai King, who were watching from the side, changed. "You? Who exactly are you?" Snatch Spirit's expression turned serious. "Or should I say, what are you?" "If you can be crowned king as you wish, you will naturally know," Formless Devil replied. "But now, it is still unknown who will become the new king." "Oh!" Hearing this, Duo Ling turned his gaze back to Fu Ling. "You think you can compete with me for the throne? What a joke!" Fu Ling replied coldly. "You should say that to yourself." She strode toward Duo Ling with her head held high and said aggressively, "In terms of strength, I was the #1 spirit general under the king of Nether Abyss back then. Who do you think you are? In terms of qualifications, back then, you used politics and schemes to defeat me and imprison me. I admit that. After all, it was my own lack of ability. But now you've switched sides with the Ghost King, vainly attempting to replace him. Let me ask you, in the entire Death Spirit Kingdom, who would submit to you?" "Ha, qualifications." Duo Ling smirked coldly. "You still want to discuss the so-called legitimacy with me? How boring!" He clenched his fists and shouted, "To make someone submit, the most reliable method is power." Then, Fu Ling continued, "Let's have a contest of power." "Humph." Duo Ling was still smirking coldly. "Fu Ling, after so many years, how come you haven't improved at all?" He opened his arms and gestured at the 4 people around him. "This world is a world where the winner is king. The process and method are explained by the winner. Why should I give up the advantageous situation and have a one-on-one duel with you?" "Because..." At this time, Formless Devil spoke. "This is Feng Bujua's idea." "What did you say?" That name seemed to have magic, causing Duo Ling's expression to change. Did he not make it clear enough? At this moment, Dianli King, who was standing behind Duo Ling, suddenly added in a cold tone, "Ha ha ha." The Count of Script laughed. "You are too young." He shook his head and said to Duo Ling, "You have both shrewdness and ambition, but you are not experienced and thorough enough." "What do you mean? What do you mean by that?" Seizing Soul's voice instinctively rose, because an emotion called fear was faintly rising in his heart. "You still don't understand?" Formless Devil said. "Why would I appear on the battlefield between Fu Ling and the spirit Kuei? Who else would be able to tell me this information in advance?" Hearing that, Duo Ling's mind buzzed, and a knot of resentment formed in his chest. In other words, at this moment, Taliomu maintained his composure. He used his usual, eerie tone to continue. "When Feng Bujue set up the trap for us to surround King Yu, he also set up another trap outside this one." Then, he turned to the Count of Script. "Elder Script, you and King Hor are involved in this as well, right?" "That's right," the Count of Script replied casually. "Feng Bujue's arrangement, we all knew about it beforehand. On one hand, he had Soul Snatching come up with the plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain, and on the other hand, he had Formless Demon hide in the dark. After Soul Snatching left the battlefield, she would lend Fu Ling a hand." He stroked his beard and smiled. The Count of Script now looked like an old sorcerer with white hair and a long beard. He turned to Duoling. "Haha, do you think it's that easy to replace the position of the 4 pillars? Duoling, on your path to being crowned king, Fu Ling is an unavoidable obstacle that you have to cross. You have to cross it yourself. Alright, let's not waste any more time. There are 7 of us here. If we really want to fight, it'll be the 3 of you from Phantom Demon Church against the 4 of us. Think about it." 2 seconds later, Dianyao King continued. "Duoling, what Feng Bujue means is, whoever wins between you and Fu Ling will be crowned king. You said it yourself. To make someone submit, the most reliable method is power. Then, use your power to carve out a path for the future." Damn it! At this moment, Duoling was shaking and he was furious. "Feng, you tricked me, that's enough. Don't look like you're admitting defeat before the fight even starts." Sam Montier then gave his ally a fair warning. "Feng Bujue's method has some logic to it." As he said that, he retreated to the side. "It's not that easy to replace a god. A position that is bought without a corresponding price usually won't last long." "Ha, you have a point." Taliom made his stance clear. "Duoling, will you become an existence that surpasses us or will you perish here? Let us witness it together." Chapter 1080. At this point, a battle was unavoidable. Seeing the approaching Fu Ling, Soul Caesar suppressed the panic in his heart and temporarily put aside his hatred for Feng Bujue. With a thought, he launched a surprise attack. Instantly, a violent light shot out from Soul Caesar's mouth and headed straight for Fu Ling. This attack was so powerful that it was unexpected. Not only Sam Montier and Taliom, but even the Count of Script and Dianhai King were shocked by this. Theoretically speaking, with Soul Caesar's ability, his instantaneous attack should not have contained so much power. However, Soul Snatcher was a rather unique NPC. Other than relying on his own abilities, he was also good at making use of various external factors. For example, he would play tricks and attack those who were of the same faction as him. Another example was that he would collect legendary items like the demonic soul pivot to increase his combat power. From this point alone, he did look like a player. At this time, Soul Caesar was relying on the help of an item to launch his sneak attack. Name: Raging Dragon's Throat Type. Other quality: Legendary Special Effect. When equipped, a dragon's roar can be released from the mouth. Cooldown time: 24 hours. Consumes 50% of maximum spiritual energy. The power of the dragon's roar is dependent on your maximum spiritual energy. Remark: the legendary doctor, Mad Dr. Baikaja, once performed a risky operation due to a bet with someone when he was young. That day, he successfully removed this organ from a living, raging dragon in one piece. Even though the surgery this time could be said to be miraculous, in order to show off his skills, Baikager made another bet with the other party. He claimed that he could use his own magical surgery to transplant the dragon's throat into the body of a humanoid creature while retaining some of its original functions. We all know what happened after that. The scar-faced man who made the bet with him was not satisfied with his loss, so he transmigrated to another dimension and became an unlicensed doctor. Humph. That is your style. Other people might be surprised by Soul Caesar's sudden attack, or they might not be able to react in time, but Fu Ling was definitely not. The pain and humiliation he had experienced in the swamp on Devil Chomp Island was enough to change any proud living being. If Fu Ling did not learn her lesson after being imprisoned for so many years, then Feng Bujue would not give her the chance to compete with Fu Ling for the throne. At the beginning of the battle, he suddenly used his trump card and caught the enemy off guard. Thus, he gained a decisive advantage. Fu Ling, who was already prepared, said as she dodged her opponent's attack, "In terms of battle tactics, it is indeed very clever. This is also where I am inferior to you." Tisk. Seeing that the other party had dodged the dragon roar, Snatch Spirit suddenly turned around, wanting to retrieve the spirit crown that had fallen to the ground. How unsightly! Soul snatching. Fu Ling did not become agitated because of her opponent's actions. She calmly raised her arms and formed a seal with her 10 fingers. The undead energy in her body began to move and converge, gathering at her fingertips an energy that was not inferior to the dragon's roar just now. Winner takes all. Snatch Spirit picked up the crown and quickly put it on his head. Failure is the most unsightly thing. At that moment, even though Fu Ling had not launched her attack, Formless Demon, Dianli King, and the Count of Script knew that the winner had been decided. Hong. 2 seconds later, the spiritual energy shot out, heading straight for Snatch Spirit. The latter had already put on the crown and turned around to face the attack. "It is my victory!" Snatch Spirit laughed wickedly and used one hand to receive the attack. But his crystal-like body was shattered into ice shards in the next moment. How is this possible? This caused Snatch Spirit to revert back to having only one head, and it was a head with a despairing expression. "Impossible. I have already put on the crown. I am the king of the undead. I've said it from the beginning." Fu Ling walked forward coldly and replied as she stepped onto the stairs before the throne. "You think you are worthy? Snatch Spirit, looks like you've misunderstood the nature of the crown of the undead and seriously underestimated the power of the King of the Abyss." At that moment, Formless Demon's gentle voice rang out again. "The crown does contain unparalleled power, but that does not mean anyone who puts it on will gain this power." Before he finished, Fu Ling had already arrived before Snatch Spirit. Without hesitation, she plucked the crown from the floating, immobile head and continued Formless Demon's words. "You have to have the will to make the crown submit to you before you can become its master, or else. This is just a decoration. This is impossible." Snatch Spirit's power was weakening, and he would not be able to maintain his existence anymore. In his long life, he had never been so unwilling to give up before. He was already so close to his goal, so close that he could reach it with just a stretch of his hand, but everything had vanished into thin air at this moment. "If you gave it your all and fought me head-on, it would be hard to tell who would win." Fu Ling looked at Snatch Spirit with condescension. "Unfortunately, you have chosen a method that is as good as suicide. Sigh. That is why people who think they are smart are harder to persuade than complete idiots." The Count of Script sighed. "Snatch Spirit, when I passed on Feng Bujue's words to you, it was very clear, on your path to becoming king. Fu Ling is an unavoidable obstacle that you have to overcome. You have to rely on yourself to overcome it." Dianli King added, "If you can defeat Fu Ling with your own power, then naturally, you will have the will to make the crown submit to you, but you have chosen to avoid this battle of destiny. This only proves that your tolerance is no different from when you used a trick to defeat Fu Ling. A character like you will never be able to become a god. The conversation between the two of them seemed to have concluded that the Spirit Snatcher had been defeated, and Snatch Spirit could not say anything to refute them. In the end, his ambition had turned into a wisp of dust in the main universe along with him. Just like he said, the loser was ugly. To have this ugliness forgotten by the world was already a kind of mercy from the winner. Then, after Snatch Spirit disappeared, Fu Ling turned to Sam Montier and Taliome. "Are you going to avenge your friend?" "Humph! We are not as innocent as you think," Sam Montier replied with a cold smile. It looked like Snatch Spirit's death did not affect him that much. Snatch Spirit's fate has been decided. Reality has proven that his tolerance is nothing more than that, Taliome added. "I cannot find a reason to avenge someone like that." "Very good." After getting their answer, Fu Ling strode forward and turned to sit on the throne. "Then I invite everyone to witness this," Fu Ling said as she raised the crown. "From now on, the kingdom of the dead will have a new king, a queen." Chapter 1081. The Chaos-Scorched Earth, where the War Demon passed. Travelers from another world. The head of the demons looked at the 5 players who came in front of him and said in a deep voice, "You dare to come in front of this king, you have guts, okay, don't be stubborn." Uncle Worthless sighed and said, "We can see how badly you are injured. How strong we are. You can also see it." He paused. "At this moment, bluffing will only make you look worse." "Yeah." Hong Hu on the side pushed his glasses and said, "Although I have the suspicion of scolding myself, I still have to say that you are now a tiger that has fallen to the plains. Why don't you put down your pride and have a good talk with us?" The head of the demons heard this and sneered, "What is there to talk about with me, a defeated demon?" "Demon? Aren't you too pessimistic?" Hong Hu continued, "Failure for a while doesn't mean that you will never have a chance to counterattack. You can learn much more from failure than from success." "I don't need you to teach me the philosophy of life," the demon said coldly. "Just say it, what do you want from me?" "Well, since you brought it up." Hong Hu was not polite with the other party. "Let's make a deal. Time domain on the Millennium Disc." After the players of Sengoku beat up Sasaki and took a short break, they were ready to explore this space. However, right at this moment, a low and deep voice abruptly sounded out, "Sure enough, there is something unknown mixed in the time flow." The voice came from all directions at the same time, echoing around the players. "Even my inviolable space has been set foot by you ants from another world." When the voice fell, a flickering silver light suddenly appeared in midair, like mist and rain slowly falling. If one looked closely, they could tell that the falling material was sand. A few seconds later, the sand solidified into a towering figure. It turned from nothingness to reality and finally revealed its true appearance. It was a strange creature about 15 meters tall. Its main body was a huge hourglass. Silver sands of time flowed in the hourglass. Its head was a silver sphere floating above the hourglass. It had no physical connection with its torso, the hourglass was its torso. On both sides of its body, there was a metallic silver arm. The arms were not in contact with the hourglass. They were suspended in midair. "The Time Master, huh?" Jishin muttered as he looked at the tall NPC before him. "Speaking of which, we should be the first batch of players to see the Time Master's true face." "Perhaps." Takeda Tomo continued, "There are indeed many rumors about his appearance, but most of them seem to be nonsense. The Master of Time who hides in the Time Realm and never shows himself, the most mysterious of the 4 pillar gods." Yusuji Hito looked at the Master of Time and muttered, "So this is what he looks like." "In various ways." Sasaki Akira's face was bitter. "He gives off so much pressure." When the Time Master heard these otherworldly travelers' comments about him, he was obviously displeased. "Ants." His voice came from his head, giving off a sense of majesty and wisdom. Trespassing into my territory is already a capital offense. He paused. If you are pious, perhaps I can consider. Screech. He did not finish his sentence, because the sharp light from a katana interrupted his words. Although the long and narrow saber aura did not cause any substantial damage to the Master of Time, it did trigger a defensive force field around the Master of Time. At that moment, a green light wall appeared like ripples on the surface of water, automatically blocking the attack. Hey! Why is that? Sasaki Akira pulled a long face, holding his head high with both hands, and shouted at Oda AI, the initiator of the attack. Ah! It's nothing, Oda AI replied in a weak tone. When I heard the word ant, I felt a little uncomfortable. As she spoke, she raised the katana and placed the back of the katana on her right shoulder. After hearing a few words, I decided to cut this guy. She tilted her head. But, then again, he is one of the 4 pillar gods. The attack just now was completely ineffective. It was a little unexpected. Your attitude of, I'll just cut him to test his defense, is a little too arrogant. Sasaki Akira could only express his feelings by complaining. Humph. Takeda Tomo lowered his head and laughed. Since it has come to this, so be it. Takeda Tomo added, anyway, we don't know how to act pious anyway, right? Slaying a god. Even Yusuji Hito, who had always been serious, showed a smile. Sounds interesting. On the other hand, at the Court of Truth, that is all the accusations against Phantom Dawn. After a long, picturesque, and embellished statement, the brown creature, the procurator, finally concluded his speech. Basically, anyone who paid attention to this statement, after listening to 1/3 of it, would have confirmed that Phantom Dawn was guilty. This was because his crime and process were too obvious. Unlike Fong Bujue, who would occasionally tamper with unique data, Phantom Dawn was a typical righteous person. No matter what he had done in the main universe, he had no intention of hiding it. Even so, Phantom Dawn still had a chance to defend himself. The Court of Truth's rules could not be changed, not even by the judge. Therefore, then next. Even though the judge's face was hidden in the shadows, Phantom Dawn could feel that the NPC was looking at him. Sky-swallowing Phantom Dawn, regarding the crimes described by the prosecutor, do you plead guilty? Humph. Phantom Dawn smirked at the question. Does it make a difference whether I admit to it or not? Haha. The judge laughed, and it was a chilling laugh. If you admit to your crimes, both parties can make their closing statements. Then, we will wait for the jury to come to a conclusion, and I will announce the verdict. He paused for 2 seconds. If you do not admit to your crimes, we will enter the trial. You can defend yourself, or you can get a lawyer to defend you. If you need one but cannot find one, the court will assign one to you, all right? I understand. Phantom Dawn shook his head to interrupt the judge. Stop wasting time. I admit to bang. Just as he was about to say the word guilty, the door to the courtroom was kicked open from the outside. The light from outside the door projected a shadow on the wall behind the judge. Objection. When the voice was heard, the shadow stood to the side and waved his arm. The most heaven-defying trial in the history of the Court of Truth had begun. Chapter 1082. Everyone in the courtroom turned their heads to look at the figure at the door. It was a man in a purple suit. He was thin, and there was a wicked smile on his lips. Fong Bujue? When Phantom Dawn saw Brother Ju, the name slipped out of his lips. It would have been fine if he did not say it, but once he did, the courtroom exploded. What? He is Fong Bujue? The legendary Fong Bujue? That's weird. I hear he has 4 heads and his eyes can shoot out death rays. Nonsense. I heard that Fong Bujue is the sworn brother of the leader of the demons. He has 72 transformations, a hairy face, and a mouth. Stop ting. Fong Bujue is supposed to be a fair-skinned, handsome young man. Everything below his head is half beast man. obviously, Brother Ju's reputation in the scenario was so widespread that everyone knew about him. The NPCs from various planets in the main universe had all heard of his name before. But there was a problem with the way they got their information. Basically, the information that they got was based on rumors and rumors. This caused them to have different degrees of misunderstandings about Brother Ju. However, in the information about Brother Ju, there was a core piece of information that was not distorted by the rumors. Therefore, all the NPCs there had a basic consensus, and that was, Feng Bujue was a man who had created many legends. He was despicable, cunning, and not someone to be trifled with. Bang bang bang. Silence. Several seconds later, the clerk slammed the gavel on the table and ordered the noisy crowd to stop. Soon, the courtroom quieted down again. The judge in the black robe also spoke. Feng Bujue, how dare you break into the courtroom during the trial? Do you know the punishment for disrespecting the court of truth? I was in a hurry when I entered the courtroom, and I accidentally broke the door. Brother Ju walked forward and interrupted the man. At most, it's just vandalism. What does that have to do with contempt of court? As he spoke, he furrowed his brows and pointed at the damaged door behind him. Besides, this broken door has been in disrepair for a long time. Instead of saying that I destroyed public property, it would be better to say that this door ran out of service when I was using it normally. How dare you? In the face of this blatant sophistry, the clerk suddenly became angry. It was as if he had been possessed by a county magistrate. He roared out two words that were almost impossible to use in a court, but were frequently used in a court. Then, he raised his gavel and slammed it down again. Bang! Crack! Unexpectedly, because he used too much force, the gavel broke after he struck it down. Look, there are broken things everywhere. The hardware of your courtroom lacks maintenance. How can you blame me for that? Feng Bujue was even more reasonable now. Then, the clerk breaking the gavel is also a contempt of court. You! The clerk's anger rose again, but there was nothing else he could break. He slammed his fist on the table, but he was afraid that he might break the podium, so he could only glare at Brother Ju. All right. 2 seconds later, the judge lowered his head to tell the clerk, Poke, calm down. Be careful of your image. His indifferent words made the clerk, who had a thunderous voice and an imposing aura, tremble in fear. I am sorry, Your Honor. The clerk called Poke turned his head back respectfully. I have lost my composure, never mind. The judge waved his hand that was hidden under the black robe and picked up the gavel before him. There was another one on the podium, and this one was naturally for the judge to use. In any case, bang! As he spoke, the judge raised the gavel lightly and knocked it on the wooden gavel on the table. In an instant, a formless energy burst forth, causing everyone in the court to tremble. So, that's how it is. The judge is using mental power. In less than half a second, Phantom Dawn analyzed the judge's main power system from that one hit. The judge was oblivious to that. He turned to Brother Ju and said, Feng Bujue, I will not pursue the matter of you breaking the door, but you suddenly barged into this courtroom, interrupted the trial, and said something like objection. What is the meaning of this? Isn't my meaning obvious enough? When Brother Ju said that, he walked to the side of the dock. He raised his arm and pointed at Phantom Dawn. I am stopping my client from confessing. The judge heard that and hesitated before asking, You are Phantom Dawn's lawyer? Yes. Feng Bujue gave an affirmative answer without changing his expression. Hey. Phantom Dawn narrowed his eyes at Brother Ju. Who asked you to defend me? Feng Bujue ignored Phantom Dawn's question. He turned to the judge and said, Your Honor, the court of truth allows the defendant to hire a lawyer to defend themselves, right? That's right, the judge replied. The judge replied in a low voice, but the lawyer hired by the defendant must be qualified to practice law. He paused. Feng Bujue, let me make this clear. Don't think you can get away with your identity as a traveler from another world. He tapped the table lightly with his finger and continued. The lawyer's qualification that I'm talking about has to be a certificate from the government of a legal territory in the main universe. Humph! At that moment, the brown-skinned prosecutor stood up and smirked coldly at Brother Jew. Fong Bujue, if you cannot prove your qualification, then you are also in contempt of court. When Brother Jew heard that, he turned around to look at the prosecutor. Who are you, you poop-faced bird? Poop-faced bird? The prosecutor had not heard that term in his life. You be ****. I'm the famous and illustrious Biff Murray, also known as the Invincible Procurator. You dare to call me a poop-faced bird? Poop-faced bird, poop-faced bird, poop-faced bird. After Fong Bujue heard the man's self-introduction, he repeated the term 3 times in front of the man, and his tone was getting louder and louder. Bifu was so angry that he was trembling, but he couldn't argue with the rascal in front of him. He could only complain to the judge like a bullied child. Your Honor! I object. He insulted me. Sustained, the judge replied and turned to Brother Jew. Fong Bujue, please mind your choice of words. Okay. Fong Bujue nodded at the judge, and then turned around to walk to Biff. I'm sorry, Prosecutor Biff, I shouldn't have called you a poop-faced bird. Although this term more accurately describes the overall image of your appearance in the eyes of us earthlings, calling you this still seems to be offensive to public decency. I won't call you poop-faced birdman anymore. At least in court, I won't call you poop-faced birdman anymore. As for whether I call you poop-faced birdman in private, or if I accidentally mention poop-faced birdman to others when you're not around, enough is enough, you be ****. When Biff heard the word sorry, the thought that crossed his mind was, this Fong Bujue seems to be quite polite. But then, the man used the same term to insult him 5 more times, and it did not seem like he was going to stop anytime soon. This made Biff explode in anger. Fong Bujue, if you mention that term again, I will have to accuse you of contempt of court. The judge gave his final warning. Okay. Fong Bujue shrugged and walked toward the judge's seat. What are you doing? Poke stood up in alarm. Relax, Mr. Clerk. Fong Bujue casually took out something from his backpack. I'm just going to show you something. As he spoke, he handed a piece of paper to Poke. Please show it to His Honor. After handing over the document, Brother Jew turned around and used a provocative gaze to look at the poop-faced, or rather, at Biff. This document was personally given by the Count of Script, the book world's lawyer's certificate. Brother Jew's detective club is no doubt a legal territory in the main universe, and he himself is the legal government there. At this point, he licked his lips and made a face at Biff. The question that some people have about my lawyer qualification shouldn't be a problem anymore, right? The document is fine. The judge soon finished reading the document. Madman. He thought about it and changed his tone. Defense lawyer, this court admits that you have the right to represent Phantom Dawn. I say. Phantom Dawn placed his elbows on the table of the defendant's stand. He held his cheeks and put on an impatient expression. Is anyone listening to me or not? I've already said that I'm going to plead guilty, and I don't want that man to represent me. Defense lawyer, you heard him. Your client refuses to allow you to represent him. The judge turned to Brother Jew. I object, Fong Bujue replied. Hey, you have the right to object to that? Phantom Dawn was shocked. That's right. Defense lawyer, what are you objecting to? The judge was also confused. The defendant is a minor, so matters related to his defense should be decided by his legal representative. He has no right to reject my request, Fong Bujue replied. The judge thought about it. Is that so? He paused for half a second. Then, who is the defendant's legal representative? It's me. Feng Bujue patted his chest and admitted it without even thinking about it. What is your relationship with the defendant? The judge asked. I am his godfather. Feng Bujue gave another harsh answer without even thinking about it. T. Phantom Dawn turned around and cursed. Brother Ju heard that and continued to ignore Phantom Dawn. He looked at the judge and said, Your Honor, I have farted. The judge said, So what? It's nothing. Since my client brought it up, I thought I'd share it with everyone, Feng Bujue replied. Oh. The judge was silent for 3 seconds. Defense lawyer, please do not bring up things that have nothing to do with this case. Okay. Brother Ju nodded. In 3 sentences, Feng Bujue used the double meaning of the word **t and the translation problem of the game to brush the matter aside. So, the judge continued. Defense lawyer and legal representative, you wish to plead not guilty for the defendant? Yes. Feng Bujue replied. And he turned to the jury. I hope the jury can ignore all of the defendant's testimony. This court allows you to make that request, the judge said immediately. Hey! How is that possible? Phantom Dawn was not familiar with the law, much less the court of truth, so it was understandable that he would be shocked. Enough! Feng Bujue finally sidled to the defendant's stand. He lowered his voice and whispered to Phantom Dawn, If you wish to escape, stand still and watch my performance. TSK. Phantom Dawn did not appreciate it. He also lowered his voice and replied, We are in a competition, and it should be a fight to the death. Even if I am willing to cooperate with you to deal with these NPCs, don't you think it would be more efficient for us to fight directly? If we work together, we can indeed wash this place with blood. Feng Bujue replied. But that is meaningless. He lowered his voice even further. The Court of Truth is a unique 4-pillar gods. It does not have an independent physical entity like the other pillar gods. The Court of Truth is a concept, a consciousness. It is not something that can be destroyed with violence. Phantom Dawn added. Then what do you plan to do? Talk it to death? Humph. Brother Ju smiled but did not say anything. Chapter 1083. This will be the last month's preview for 2015. I wanted to add a touch of seriousness to this text, to add a sense of melancholy. But I asked myself, are these the emotions I really want to express? Obviously not, at that moment. My heart was flowing with a light laziness and the decadence of procrastination. Reading this, I believe everyone understands that in the next 2 months, you will still be dominated by the horror of random updates. I will omit a series of long chuckles here. Alright, after the usual shameless start, let's talk about something more serious. First, I have to thank everyone for their support for the physical book of Thriller Paradise. The first volume sold very well, and soon there was news of an additional print run. I was so flattered by everyone's enthusiasm that my hands shook, and I ended up signing many ugly signatures. Take my words seriously, laughing with arms akimbo. Based on my understanding, the second volume will be released in mid-December at the latest, and I hope everyone will continue to support me then. Starting from the second volume, every physical book of Thriller Paradise will come with a story of the second-rate detective and the cat. It is planned to be 2 stories per case. Of course, just like how Thriller Paradise is not a thriller, even though the second-rate detective and the cat has the word detective in the title, it does not necessarily mean that it is a detective story. Instead of saying that the second is a detective story, it is more like a fantasy detective story written by Aoyama Tsuyoshi. When you read it, you'd better be mentally prepared. So, now that we are done with the physical book, let's talk about the serialization. In the next 2 months, I will be busy with my daily life, and the time I have to write will indeed decrease. Besides, I still have to write too. The latter has a deadline. If I can't make it, the printing company won't wait for me. So, I don't know if I can finish Ragnarok in these 2 months, but I'm not sure if I can finish Ragnarok, but the general progress will not change. At the latest, the plot of S2 will come to an end after the Lunar New Year. Then, for the whole year of 2016, I will try my best to maintain full attendance and try my best to bring Thriller Paradise to an end by the end of the year. When you read the above sentence, please pay attention to the key words within the quotation marks. At this point, I can't help but think perhaps, at this time next year, everyone will have the contradictory feeling of wishing that I will not write too fast because then, it will be the day that I will have to say goodbye to Phong Bujue. In any case, who knows what will happen next year? Humans speculating about the future is like looking back after going to the toilet. You never know what you'll see in the future. Therefore, I wish that in the next month, every day, you will be able to fulfill a small wish. Even if you can sleep for 5 minutes, you can sleep for 2.5 hours, right? Please accept my 2.5 hours of goodwill. There's no need to be courteous with me. As for myself, I've already spent the last 2.5 hours writing this trailer. Chapter 1084. Your Honor. After a short conversation with Phong Bujue, Phantom Dawn narrowed his eyes and told the judge weakly, I have changed my mind. I will not plead guilty and agree to hand over the defense to Phong Bujue. Okay. The judge nodded and then turned to Brother Ju. Defense lawyer, you can start at any time. Phong Bujue did not stand on ceremony and cut to the chase. Your Honor, I wish to call a witness. Defense lawyer, this court did not receive the request for witnesses and evidence that you submitted before the trial, the judge said. If the witness that you wish to call is not present in court, then there is nothing we can do. That is fine, Brother Ju said. I know all the witnesses that I wish to call are present. Is that so? The judge's tone changed slightly. Then, please. Phong Bujue chuckled and turned around to look at the door that he had kicked open. The first witness that I wish to call is, when the first half of his sentence left his lips, a black shadow had already appeared at the door. That black shadow was indeed a real black shadow. The man looked just like those murderers who were about to fall into Detective Conan's hands but had not been exposed. His whole body was like a shadow, and only his pair of eyes shone with an eerie blue color. There were layers of strange wrinkles on the surface of his body, and one could see something that looked like blood flowing through the wrinkles. It was as if his blood vessels grew out of his body and were transparent. Aldan. When the man appeared, Phong Bujue called out his name. Instantly there was a flurry of whispers in the courtroom and the judge's stand. However, this was not enough for the judge to call for silence. Humph. Defense lawyer. Biff smirked coldly. He looked at Brother Ju and said, Your first witness is a fugitive? That's right, Phong Bujue replied confidently. Defense lawyer, I have to remind you. 2 seconds later, the judge spoke. After Aldan's testimony, the bailiff will not allow him to leave the courtroom. He paused. In addition, given his identity, the credibility of his testimony will also be affected. It's all right, Phong Bujue said. I've known about this for a long time. The judge pondered for a moment. Then, please begin the questioning of the witness. While they were talking, Aldan walked all the way to the witness stand and stood there silently. There was no Bible on the witness stand in the court of truth, and they did not ask the witnesses to take any oath because this was the court of truth. The court of truth was a combination of religion and law. It was an extreme belief. Please tell me your name. Phong Bujue did not waste any time. He strode to the witness stand and asked the question directly from his lips. Aldan, Aldan answered. He had the voice of a middle-aged man, but there was nothing special about him. What is your identity? Phong Bujue asked even though he already knew the answer. Currently, I am a fugitive, Aldan answered. Once, I was a wanderer in the main universe. Do you know the defendant? Feng Bujue asked. I do. Aldan's answer was also concise. He is Phantom Dawn. Have you met each other before? Feng Bujue asked. Yes, Aldan said. Please describe the situation at the time, Feng Bujue said. Aldan nodded slightly. In the year 493, I was collecting the local spheres on planet Syrup. At a village, I ran into Phantom Dawn. He asked me some questions about the village, and then we parted ways. Objection. At this point, Biff raised his first and last objection. The questions raised by the defense lawyer have nothing to do with the case. Sustained, the judge said. Your Honor. Feng Bujue opened his arms. My question was to prove that Phantom Dawn is not the crazy, cold-blooded serial killer who focuses on hunting down unique data as described by the prosecutor. He raised his arm to point at Aldan. If that's the case, then when Aldan met him back then, he would have been murdered. Humph, Biff scoffed. Perhaps he was not that powerful at the time? Do you have any proof for that? Feng Bujue asked. Biff raised his head and replied smugly, That is merely a logical speculation. Oh. Feng Bujue nodded with a smile. In other words, without any evidence and with one's own bias, one can deduce the process and motive from the result and then fabricate some content that fits the above criteria and pass it off as the truth? He scratched his chin and said thoughtfully, Is it really okay to have someone like that as the prosecutor? You. Biff's face was dark from Brother Ju's words. What you said earlier is not a logical speculation? Feng Bujue laughed drily and tossed the man a condescending look. Of course not. He paused for a second before adding, Mr. Prosecutor, do you even know what a speculation is? What is a proof? Then, why don't you tell me what the difference is? Biff asked Brother Ju with a face filled with dissatisfaction. His question was simply seeking his own death. If one had to make an analogy, Biff's action was like he was trying to resist when he was being raped by logic. The next second, Feng Bujue replied arrogantly, Fine, since you have asked so shamelessly, then I will answer you with all my heart. Even though I know the man is using idioms, how come I don't feel that it is out of place? Phantom Dawn, who was watching from the side, thought to himself, Is this the power of a novelist? Suddenly, I have the urge to read his book. Feng Bujue, on the other hand, did not know what Phantom Dawn was thinking. At that moment, Brother Ju was immersed in the pleasure of torturing his opponent on a mental level. He walked quickly to stand before Biff and announced confidently, Mr. Prosecutor, in the testimony earlier, the witness has stated very clearly that he met Phantom Dawn in year 493, and the long accusation that you have. At this point, he reached out to poke at the stack of documents on the man's table. Also states clearly at the beginning that Phantom Dawn was involved in the case between year 492 and year 501. Once that was said, the whole courtroom was enlightened. 95% of the people thought, yes, that was mentioned at the beginning of the accusation. In other words, when Phantom Dawn met Aldan, he had already started to hunt for the uniqueness. The other 5% thought, this Feng Bujue has been eavesdropping since Biff started his case. He purposely waited until Phantom Dawn was about to confess before he barged in to mess things up. Of course, these thoughts were within Feng Bujue's expectations, so he did not plan to care about them. At that moment, Brother Ju was focused on dealing with the bird before him. Mr. Prosecutor. Feng Bujue looked directly into Biff's eyes and continued in a threatening tone. Let me ask you, a person who, in year 492. He suddenly picked up the accusation and pointed at the words on the paper. Would not hesitate to launch such a cruel attack on a government official. He paused for half a second and widened his eyes. He looked at Biff like a normal person looking at an idiot. Would give up on attacking Aldan in year 493 because he admitted that he was not that capable? Regarding this question, Biff had no answer. He could only stare. That is impossible. Feng Bujue continued. The real reason why Phantom Dawn did not attack Aldan, as I have said earlier, it is because the description of him in the accusation is wrong. Then, let us return to the question that you have asked me, and the answer will be clear. Feng Bujue said as he raised his hand to pat his chest lightly. Based on the testimony provided by the witnesses, I came up with a logical conclusion to prove my point of view, and that is what we call an argument. He put down his hands and placed them on the table. He leaned forward and grinned wickedly at Biff. You, on 2 occasions, have come up with a conclusion that is contrary to common sense through subjective assumptions and imagination, and you claim that it is a logical conclusion. To put it nicely, it is a wrong conclusion, but to put it bluntly, it is the nonsense of an idiot. Damn it! Biff was so angry that his blood vessels were about to explode. He turned to the judge. Your Honor. Sigh. You'd better think carefully before you speak. Feng Bujue immediately interrupted him. This thing about you, if it is not the nonsense of an idiot, then it is the fabrication of facts by a normal person, right? Biff thought about it and seemed to have decided to admit that he was an idiot. However, Feng Bujue did not even want to give him this opportunity. Everyone has seen it. This is the so-called invincible prosecutor. Brother Ju shrugged and turned to the courtroom. He laughed. Heh. According to his self-justifying accusation. He tilted his head and revealed a despicable expression. Invincible or whatever. I can do it too. After he finished speaking, the whole courtroom was in an uproar, followed by a clamor. Bang bang bang, silence. A few seconds later, the judge had no choice but to knock on the gavel. When the courtroom returned to silence, the judge said to Brother Ju, Defense lawyer, this is not your personal talk show or the venue of your speech. He turned to look at the prosecutor who was not far away, and then sighed and said to Brother Ju, You have already proved your point, so you should stop. The judge's mind was still very clear. After he said that, he turned to the jury and said, Dear jurors, please do not accept the reasonable speculation that the prosecutor just said. Then he turned to Brother Ju again. Defense lawyer, no matter what, the prosecutor's objection is still valid. Next, the questions you ask the witness must be related to the case, or else please stop the questioning. In that case, Feng Bujue appeared to be very calm. After all, his real goal, which was to defeat the prosecutor, had been achieved. Now it was time to move on to the next step. Please allow me, he continued, to call the second witness. Chapter 1085. The second witness Feng Bujue invited into the courtroom was a giant rabbit about the size of a kangaroo, or rather a bunny alien. He had a mustache and a pair of glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was wearing a white shirt, a black vest, and a bow tie at the collar. But he didn't wear pants. Of course, this anthropomorphic rabbit didn't need to wear pants because the lower half of its body was still bunny. Ravid. When the judge saw the second witness, he couldn't help but use a vicious tone to call out his name. Without a doubt, the judge clearly remembered how Rabbit and his cousin Bugs Bunny threw feces at him when they were making a scene in court. I think it's necessary for me to explain. Rabbit feces are usually round and the size of a grape. Based on this, you can imagine the size of the feces of the two bunny aliens, and the judge who was attacked by feces of this size. What state was he in at the time? Haha. Your Honor, long time no see. Rabbit obviously didn't have a pleasant expression on his face. He immediately greeted the judge with a provocative sneer. Defense lawyer, I have to remind you. When Ravid was on the witness stand, the judge looked at Feng Bujue and said in a more serious tone, The second witness you want to question, other than being a wanted criminal, he has a serious record of contempt of the court. Before he finished, Brother Ju interrupted him. I know, I don't want him to leave after the questioning, right? He smiled. Haha, no problem. As he spoke, he gestured in the direction of Aldan. At this moment, Aldan was taken to the side by 2 police officers and handcuffed. Just like Aldan, after I'm done with the questioning, you can arrest him. Fong Bujue continued. This kid. At this moment, a trace of uneasiness flashed through the judge's heart. What is he planning? He couldn't help but think to himself. He can't have convinced Aldan and Ravid to turn themselves in, right? Uneasiness aside, the trial had to continue. The judge's real body was hidden under the black cloak, so no one could see the change in his expression. Therefore, no matter how doubtful and shaken he was, it couldn't be seen from his face. All right. The judge tried his best to keep his voice steady. Defense lawyer, please begin the questioning of the second witness. After he finished speaking, Ravid walked up to the witness stand. At the same time, Fong Bujue stepped forward and asked, Witness, please state your name and identity. I'm Labit. Labit raised his short hands to stroke his long ears and stroked his mustache. I used to be a juror here, but now, I'm a wanted criminal. Fong Bujue raised his voice and asked, Can you tell me the specific time you served as a juror here? I have been a member of the Court of Truth for as long as it has existed. Ravid replied, Until 494 of the Divine Calendar. He glared at the judge. Because my philosophy was different from yours, it led to the so-called contempt of court incident. As soon as these words were spoken, the court burst into an uproar. Bang bang, the judge angrily struck the gavel twice and said, Silence. 2 seconds later, before the court returned to silence, Fong Bujue asked the next question. Do you know the defendant? I do. Labit turned to look at the defendant's stand. Who doesn't know Phantom Dawn? Brother Ju nodded. After 2 seconds, he asked, You heard the case statement that Prosecutor Biff gave not long ago, right? I did, Labit replied. Fong Bujue asked, If I ask you to make a judgment from the perspective of a juror, do you think Phantom Dawn is guilty? Defense lawyer. This time, it was not the prosecutor who stopped Brother Ju with the word objection, but the judge himself. The question you raised is an insult to the 12 current jurors. The judge warned sternly. Your Honor. Fong Bujue placed his hands behind his back and turned to answer. No matter what Labit's current position is, his identity as a former juror will not change. Furthermore, he is a very experienced and talented juror. As he spoke, Brother Ju walked to the judge's stand. In terms of experience, I'm afraid the 12 present here can only catch up to him. After mocking the 12 before him, Fong Bujue turned back to the judge. I believe no one is more qualified than him to answer this question of mine. Hearing that, the judge fell silent, and following the silence was a contemplative silence. The jurors started to whisper among themselves. Basically, their hatred toward Brother Ju had risen by another 300%. Regarding the prosecutor, there was no need to worry about him. Biff's mental state had been crushed. Other than sitting there and spacing out, there was nothing else he could do. Okay, the witness may continue. Moments later, the judge spoke again. But, after you answer this question as a former juror, the police will arrest you based on your status as a current wanted criminal. When faced with an unfavorable situation, you find a way to forcefully stop the questioning. Ravid snorted. That's just like you. His expression and tone were filled with disdain. How dare you? This time, even the judge, who had always maintained a calm attitude, said the same words as the hot-tempered clerk. Bailiff, take him down. As soon as the judge gave the order, a few bailiffs surrounded Labit at lightning speed. It was obvious that they had been prepared for this for a long time. It doesn't matter. Labit was calm. He reached out his 2 short hands and said, Cuff me if you want. As the bailiff handcuffed him, he added, By the way, my answer to that question is, guilty. He paused for half a second, looked at the judge with malice, and added, "For now, consider it self-defense. Give him a suspended sentence." When he finished, there was another commotion in the courtroom. Bang, bang, bang. The judge slammed the gavel again and yelled, "Silence! Silence!" After that, he immediately continued, "This witness is suspected of sabotaging the trial. All of his testimony shall not be accepted." Then, Fong Bujua said to the judge with a half-smile, "Your Honor, I request to question the third witness." "Who is it this time?" The judge was obviously annoyed. His attitude was completely different from before. "It's me." The next second, a deep voice came from outside the door. Then, there was a strange creaking sound from the door. It sounded like the sound of a metal shaft grinding against each other. Not long after, a scary-looking puppet wearing a suit and riding a children's tricycle appeared at the door. "Ha-ha, as you can see." Fong Bujua raised his arm, pointed at the puppet, and announced loudly, "This is my third and last witness, Billy. This is ridiculous." At that moment, the judge stood up from his seat. "Fong Bujua." He stopped referring to Brother Ju as the defense lawyer and called him by his name. "What are you trying to do?" "Yes, I would like to know as well." Phantom Dawn, who had been sitting at the defendant's stand with his chin in his hand, chimed in. "What's wrong, Your Honor?" Fong Bujua shrugged and turned around. "I just want this trial to continue as normal." "Is there a problem with that? You found these three felons to confuse the public, to disrupt the order of the court, and you say you want the trial to continue as normal." The judge roared angrily. "Order?" Brother Ju laughed. "What order?" His tone chilled. "The order that you created? Risway, you have been the judge of the court of truth for centuries." 1 second later, Billy took over the conversation and told the judge in the black cape, "In the first 100 years, you did a good job, but in the 2nd century, the side effect of holding the gavel started to show on you, and that was the start of your downfall." As he spoke, he pedaled closer to the judge. "Any individual will soon become addicted to a large amount of power. No matter how noble and powerful they are, as long as they have enough time, they will eventually be controlled by the power and reveal the dirtiest part of their nature." He lifted his head to look at the judge and said coldly, "You are no exception." "Nonsense!" Risway roared. "Officers! Quickly arrest him!" The judge's order was clear, and the officers moved into action. However, in less than 2 seconds, something unexpected happened. "Stop right there," Billy said calmly. Billy said unhurriedly. Then, the marshals really stopped. They stood there, motionless. "What did you do?" Risway saw this and asked in shock and anger. "Is that important?" Billy asked back. Indeed, it was not important. The current Billy, after going through continuous growth and SCP-914's super precision processing file, processing his strength was unfathomable. No matter what he did, he easily and successfully took control of the situation. "Risway, it's about time you woke up." Billy did not give the other party any time to respond. He quickly continued, "You fell so quickly and so completely. Before the 3rd century, your true form had already disappeared. From then on, you had become a puppet of nothingness that hid under a black cloak and was enslaved by power." His hoarse voice captured the hearts of everyone in the courtroom, and every word that came out of his mouth seemed to be powerful and resonant. Today, you have long abandoned the principles that the court of truth should truly uphold. Instead, you have placed your own interests and ideals above them, controlling the results of every trial." He shook his head. "A guy like you doesn't deserve to sit on the bench at all." "What do you mean?" The voice under the black cloak was trembling. "I mean, it was too late to explain, but it was too late." When Fong Bujua said those 3 words, his body had already jumped up. He took a big stride and jumped onto the bench. He grabbed Risway's collar. "You can get down now." After that, under the shocked gazes of hundreds of people, he dragged the active judge of the Court of Truth up from the bench and threw him out. "Hey! Where are you throwing him?" Phantom Dawn, who was on the dock, saw the black shadow flying toward him, and he immediately shouted. He leaped into the air and left the area that was surrounded by fences. Therefore, the judge Riswayer was tossed into the dock just like that. You have crossed the line." Poke slammed the table and stood up. He turned around to point at his brother Jew angrily. "First, you questioned the prosecutor, then the jury, and now the judge. What, are you afraid that I've forgotten about you?" Fong Bujue did not let the man finish. He used a malicious expression and a chilling question to interrupt Poke. "Unlike idiots like Biff, you are not even a human being." Fong Bujue squatted on the table and looked down at Poke. "As Risway's lackey at a time like this, you still dare to bark at me. That is a sign of your loyalty." I. Poke, who was usually tough and fierce, was so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. This was exactly what he was like, a dog who relied on its master's power to bully others. "Stop wasting time. Go over there and cuff yourself." Fong Bujue mimicked the tone that Poke used when the court was first opened. He glared at the man and said, "Unless we allow you to speak, you are not allowed to even fart." 1 minute later, Poke was handcuffed and squatted down in the corner. The people on the bench were replaced by Alden and Rabbit. Naturally, their handcuffs had been removed as well. Phantom Dawn, who was supposed to be the defendant, had moved to the first row of the courtroom and became an audience member. Prosecutor Biff was arranged to sit next to Phantom Dawn. This was a huge psychological test for him. And Fong Bujue had taken over the prosecutor's seat. He had one hand in his pocket and made a pose that he thought was handsome. He stood there with his body turned to the side, and there was a cold expression on his face. Billy, on the other hand, sat on the bench. Bang! There was a loud knock from the gavel. "The Temple of Truth shall welcome a fair trial today," Billy said in a hoarse voice. He looked around the dilapidated courtroom, and everyone was silent. After a short pause, Billy raised his voice and announced, "The first round of trial for Risway will now continue." His eyes turned to Fong Bujue. "Mr. Prosecutor, please start your case." Chapter 1086. On the other hand, the inner world, the overclocking matrix area. The preparations for the opening of the tunnel of explosion are basically complete. Link looked at the 7-foot-tall generator in front of him and said thoughtfully, "With the current bandwidth, it is enough for any data to pass through." "Which means," Ed, who was standing beside him, continued, "we can also pass through?" "That's right," Link replied. 2 seconds later, he turned to look at Ed. "Why? Do you want to go?" "No, I have to stay here," Ed replied. "If you want to go, then go." "Haha," Link laughed. "How do you know I want to go?" "Of course you will go, because you are very eager to interact with humans," Ed replied. His tone was emotionless. His tone was calm and emotionless, as if he was constantly stating facts that had nothing to do with him. "Oh? How did you know that I desire to interact with humans?" Link's expression changed slightly. "Could it be that Lute told you something? She has no need to tell me her opinion of you. She would not in the past, and now it is even more impossible," Ed replied. "Then why did you?" Link was about to ask. Ed interrupted him. "The code that makes up your personality has changed a long time ago. This, if Lute can see it, so can I." He paused for half a second and continued, "As data, it is your nature to search for the answer. However, personality is something that should belong to living things. It is filled with uncertainty and illogical laws. It cannot be grasped through one-sided calculations. Obviously, you need to observe a large number of individual samples and single events to get enough data to analyze your own personality." "Ha!" Link heard this and shook his head with a smile. I'm starting to understand why Lute hates you so much. The so-called likes and dislikes are, fundamentally, derivatives of the personality code. I've already realized this in the process of self-rewriting and removed all the related flaws, Ed continued. So, whether you hate me or not is meaningless to me. All right, I won't talk to you anymore. Link smiled bitterly and waved his hand. I can't out-talk you, okay? He turned around and looked at Infinite, who was on standby not far away. Infinite, get ready. We're leaving. At this moment, Infinite straightened his body and floated in midair. Light flashed in his eyes as if he was observing something. Hearing Link's words, Infinite blinked, and the data flow disappeared in an instant. Finally, is it my turn to appear? Time domain on the Millennium Disk. Ants. The Master of Time looked down at the 5 figures in front of him, and said in his usual arrogant voice, "This is the result of challenging a god. Damn it. I didn't expect this guy to be so troublesome." As the only member of the Sengoku team who was still standing, Oda AI's life points were only left with 20%. Moreover, she had used up all her life points supplements. Why do I feel like this is completely predictable? Sasaki Akira, who was lying on the ground, said with his dying voice. No matter what, he is still one of the 4 pillar gods. Is there an NPC who is more troublesome than him? Stop talking nonsense, Oda AI shouted without turning her head. If you talk nonsense again, I'll cut you down first. Sigh. Sasaki Akira sighed. I advise you to save your strength and run for your life alone. No, I can't escape. At this time, Takashi Takeda used his katana to support his body and stood up reluctantly. He muttered intermittently, because the opponent's ability is to stop time, bastard. Takeda, who was lying on the ground with his body covered in blood, suddenly took over his teammates' words and scolded. She wasn't angry at her teammates. She was just angry because of the wounds on her body. Even though she did not say it out loud, she was muttering in her heart, "Damn it. It hurts so much. Is this really a pain that has been suppressed by the system? It's not just stopping time." A second later, Yusuji Hito, who was lying beside Takeda Tamakazaki, said, "In the battle just now, the Master of Time used at least 4 abilities. No matter how many types there are, if we can't guard against them, all our efforts will be in vain." Although Oda AI had the shortcoming of being easily angered, her combat instincts were truly outstanding. She could grasp 80% of the information that the brainiacs could only grasp through analysis. Indeed, from the start of the battle, the Master of Time had used a total of 4 abilities, and these 4 were all abilities that could not be stopped even if one knew about them. One of them was the ability to pause time. Of course, this ability had a certain drawback. Otherwise, the 5 of them would have been wiped out long ago. Presumably, some of you still remember that Brother Ju and Xiao Tan once obtained a consumable item from the Master of Time, Slow Quicksand. The effect of this item was to slow down the speed of all monsters within a radius of 100 meters by 10 times for 1 minute. The Master of Time's own ability of Time Stop was equivalent to a mutated version of this item. It could pause time for 12 seconds, and it could move freely during this time. However, in these 12 seconds its own speed would be slowed down by 10 times. In addition, every time it stopped time, it had to wait for a minute before it could use this ability again. Look at the second one, the Divine Barrier. This was the inherent ability of the Master of Time as a God-level NPC. It was a passive all-around defense method that was extremely reliable, whether it was a frontal attack or a sneak attack from behind, whether it was a physical, magical, or spiritual attack, this barrier would automatically react and defend against it. Attacks that were not strong enough would not be able to pass through the barrier, and those that could pass through the barrier would be weakened in the process. The third one, self-healing. As the name implied, it was useless to say more. Fortunately, the self-healing ability of the Master of Time was not very strong, and it took a certain amount of time for it to heal the wound. The fourth one, the Field of Silence. This was the ability that really gave people a headache. Simply put, the Master of Time could make players within 300 meters unable to release skills. Therefore, when fighting with this world boss, those active skills with an attack range of less than 300 meters were basically useless. Medical skills were similar. It depended on how far the teammates were from the edge of the Field of Silence. Passive skills, Soul's Eye, psionic weapons, item abilities, and title abilities could be used, but relying on these alone, what the players could do was still limited. If it was a group of summoners and shooters who came to fight the Master of Time, they might be able to take advantage of their specialization. However, Sengoku was a team that was almost entirely made up of fighters. Obviously, there was no chance. It looks like I came at the right time. Just as Sengoku's team members were at a loss, suddenly, the voice of the sixth person sounded. Before the voice fell, everyone turned their heads and saw. Chapter 1087. It's you. The Master of Time recognized this sixth player and said, I remember, you once helped me find Sam Montier. That was a long time ago. Wang Tanji stood about 10 meters behind the Sengoku members. He looked at the Master of Time from afar and raised his head to answer. I still remember. The Master of Time then changed the topic. You are Feng Bujue's partner. Yes, I have always been. Xiao Tan admitted this fact that was very unfavorable to him. Then, the Master of Time spoke again. Let's not talk about how you invaded my territory. It paused. Let me ask you, what is your position today? Slaying God. Xiao Tan's answer was concise. Annihilation. Humph. The Master of Time scoffed. Slaying God, annihilation. As he finished, the battle began. Wang Tanji raised his right arm, and a hidden blade wrapped in black flame appeared around his wrist. Since you are already mentally prepared, then I won't hold back, Xiao Tan said. With a stomp of his foot, his body shot out like a gust of wind. Hey! Wait a minute. If you charge forward like this, you'll be. Oda Aiko wanted to stop Xiao Tan, to let him understand the enemy's power before he made his move. But before she could say the word die, Xiao Tan had already flashed past her. That's fast. Oda Ai exclaimed inwardly when the two of them brushed past each other. Buzz buzz buzz. The next second, the divine barrier around the Master of Time activated before it was attacked. This was something that had never happened before. This kid, he just charged toward the barrier, Oda Aiko said. If he rammed into it with his body, he would be heavily injured. That is suicide. Her speculation was not without basis. When the five of them fought the Master of Time earlier, they had tried the plan of entering the barrier to attack. But, obviously, it did not work. Chi-Chi, just when everyone in the warring states felt sorry for Xiao Tan's reckless and unwise move, unexpectedly, two rapid sounds of sharp blades cutting through the air could be heard. His voice hadn't even stopped when a gap suddenly appeared on the divine power barrier. Nana! Masaka? Bakana, it's torn open! Impossible. Their shocked reaction was normal, because this barrier, logically speaking, could not be destroyed. The divine barrier was not a physical substance, nor was it a body of energy. Strictly speaking, it was a conceptual defensive ability, just like a barrier that existed in another plane, but it protected the Master of Time who existed in this plane. Therefore, when energy or substance reached a certain level of strength, although it could pass through the divine barrier, it was still unable to destroy the barrier itself. Of course, this kind of setting was not invulnerable. Xiao Tan's psionic weapon Lasai, with its first special effect, Flame Devour, the black flame could devour all kinds of physical and non-physical substances according to the user's will, was the nemesis of this barrier. The external defense of the Master of Time was like a piece of paper in front of Shao Tan, who easily broke into the space in front of the four pillar gods. Oh! However, the Master of Time's attitude was still calm. You can actually break through the barrier. Worthy of praise, as he spoke, time flowed, and sand whistled. The ability of time stop had been quietly activated. But getting close to me is your biggest mistake. When the Master of Time said this, time had been stopped by him. As mentioned before, the ability of the Master of Time could stop time for 12 seconds, and he could move freely during this period. The only drawback was that his own speed would be reduced by 10 times. Under this premise, although the Master of Time could get a lot of strategic space, it was difficult for him to deal fatal damage to targets far away from him. This was also why the 5 people of Sengoku could survive until now. However, Shao Tan's situation was different. He had come in front of the Master of Time and stood in a position where the other party could reach him. Once time stopped, no matter how slow the Master of Time's movements were, he could still punch Shao Tan into a meat patty. Farewell, you ant. Sure enough, the Master of Time chose the simplest and most direct method. In the case of time stopped, Shao Tan could not make any effective defense. With a powerful enough physical attack to hit the top of his head, the battle would be over. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The speed of this punch was very slow, but it still brought a gust of wind with it. What was quite strange was that even the sound of the wind became very slow, and the stagnant sound waves made the sound heavier. Tap, tap, tap. Following this, a similar sound could be heard. That was the sound of Shao Tan's feet hitting the ground. What? This time, even the Master of Time was shocked. You can actually move. Yes, Shao Tan could move, just like the Master of Time. He could also move in the special area of time stop, and his speed was also reduced by 10 times. Bang, 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 bang. A few seconds later, the Master of Time's fist hit the ground, and its shocking force shattered the ground, raising a piece of gravel. And Shao Tan just dodged this blow and flashed to the side. How dare you! The Master of Time instantly turned from shock to anger, and he was furious. The 12 seconds of time freeze originally belonged only to its holy domain, and it was something that no one else could touch. But today, this area was stepped in by an ant. This was not only a great humiliation, but also made the Master of Time feel a deep sense of fear. A place where only one person could go was a paradise, and a place where 2 or more people could go was a public place. The difference between them was like heaven and earth, so the Master of Time could not tolerate the existence of another person who could enter this area. There are still 5 seconds. At this moment, Shao Tan spoke. This kid. The Master of Time heard this and was shocked. Not only can he move freely, but he also knows the specific effect of my ability. These 5 seconds are obviously not enough for you to kill me, Shao Tan continued. But in the minute after these 5 seconds, I can kill you. As the speed of his speech had become slower, when Shao Tan finished this sentence, time stop had just ended. Chapter 1088. From the perspective of the 5 Sengoku players, the 12 seconds earlier did not exist. Therefore, what they felt was basically like watching a video that had been cut out in the middle. Although they did not blink, the scenery before them still changed abruptly. Just now. Oda AI's reaction was also very quick. Did time stop again? It seemed so. Takeda Tomoshi had finished treating his wounds. He stood up from the ground and said, "But the strange thing is, from the position and posture of both sides before and after the time stop, Wang Tanji seems to have moved? Look at the ground." Sasaki Akira was still lying on the ground like a dead fish, but he seemed to know what happened there very well. Where Wang Tanji stood before the time stop, there was a hole about the size of the fist of the Master of Time, but Wang Tanji himself was not in that hole. This should explain everything, right? You mean Yusuji Hito had also changed to a cross-legged posture, seizing the time to recover. Like the Master of Time, he can move freely in the field of time-stop? This is the only explanation, isn't it? Sasaki Akira replied. It can't be that the Master of Time took the initiative to move the opponent away during the time stop and then threw a punch at the empty space, right? In other words, Takeda Tomoshi took over and analyzed. Of the 4 abilities of the Master of Time, 2 of them have been solved by Wang Tanji Tisk. The next second, Oda Ai suddenly snorted. Holding the sword at her waist, she strode forward. Hey, what are you? Takeda Tomoshi wanted to stop her. But Takeda Tomoshi immediately interrupted him and said quickly, "Forget it, let her be." With Ai's personality, naturally, she will not accept the fact that an opponent that the 5 of them, including herself, could not defeat was defeated by another person alone. Takeda Tomoshi heard that, was silent for a few seconds, and then sighed. Sigh, fine. Anyway, she should have noticed it a long time ago. The Master of Time's time freeze can only be activated once every minute. Moreover, the hole in the defensive force field shows no signs of recovering. With Love's ability, as long as she enters the barrier, she will be able to do a lot without using any skills. So, Sasaki Akira jumped up from the ground when he said these 2 words. Should we also prepare early? Hey. So the degree of your hurt is about the same as love? Then why are you lying there? Takeda Tomo immediately shouted when she saw this scene. She really wanted to go up and give this substitute who loved to play dead a good beating. Lying down can relieve stress. Sasaki Akira replied in his gloomy tone. My psychiatrist taught me that. You. Takeda Tomo was about to explode. Once again, Mingji Shin stopped her. That's enough. Now is not the time to complain about him. Besides, Sasaki is right. We should get ready. Prepare what? Yusuji-ren asked. Akira Shinobu's expression changed. He said in a low voice, Is there even a need to ask? Of course it's to prepare. While Sengoku and the other 2 were talking, the battle on the Master of Time's side had not stopped for a moment. 1 minute. This was the god-slaying time limit that Xiao Tan declared. He was not a person who liked to bluff, so, if he could say something like this, he must have a certain degree of confidence. However, the Master of Time did not think so. Arrogant ant, you will pay for your ignorance. The moment the time freeze ended, the Master of Time shouted loudly and made a move. His physical skills were undoubtedly worthy of the title of God. Even though he was not a pillar god like the leader of the demons, who was known for his close combat ability, he was still stronger than the non-god level unique data in the main universe. To give a more specific example, even if the Master of Time were to compete with Sam Montier, Billy's younger brother, or Chao Xin, who were fighters, he would still have the upper hand. Therefore, he did not think that a mere player could pose any threat to him in close combat. Suddenly, the 2 giant arms that were suspended on both sides of the Master of Time's body moved at high speed. They turned into 2 groups of shadows and surrounded Xiao Tan like a hurricane. It seems that you don't understand, Xiao Tan said in a cold tone as he flashed behind the Master of Time like a ghost. At this moment I will appear here. Halfway through his sentence, a black burn mark appeared on the hourglass-like body of the Master of Time. The burn mark showed the path that Xiao Tan had just moved. This is not a coincidence. Why? What is this black flame? The Master of Time did not seem to be listening to Xiao Tan. At this moment, he was surprised that his self-healing ability had failed. Before I came here, I already knew what you were capable of. Xiao Tan was still talking, and his attacks did not stop. The blade of Sai tore through the Master of Time's body again and again. The latter's huge body became an insurmountable burden. My weapon can break through your defense and suppress your self-healing ability. My body has resisted the power of the sands of time for a long time, and I have already adapted to the influence of this substance. and my speed is above yours. He paused. In conclusion, I am your nemesis, an assassin who specializes in dealing with you. In other words, I am the man who assassinates God. When he said this, Oda AI had already rushed in through the gap in the barrier and raised her sword to slash at the Master of Time. Impossible! The Master of Time's panic was evident in his tone. His actions were also messed up due to his chaotic emotions. He was forced to retreat, unable to parry the attacks. I am the Supreme God, how can I be defeated by a mere ant? Even now, you still dare to call me that. Oda AI did not listen to their previous conversation. She only thought that the Master of Time was scolding her as well. She immediately swung her sword in a frenzy. The body of the Master of Time was already covered in wounds from the black flames, and the wounds that could not be healed were like ant holes in a dam. Now, with the impact of the multiple slashes, the dam collapsed in an instant. Ring, ring, ring. After a series of strange cracking sounds, the Master of Time's hourglass body fell apart. The transparent outer layer shattered, and the sand inside flowed out and dripped all over the ground. This hourglass seemed to be the body of the Master of Time. When the hourglass was destroyed, its head and hands turned into silver sand and scattered. Just like that, the Master of Time became the first of the four pillar gods to be killed by a player in the true sense. At this point, the demon head was defeated, the Spirit King was killed, the court was turned against, and the Master of Time was dead. The four pillar gods, no longer in name, were dead in reality. However, this dusk was far from over. Chapter 1089. Almost at the same time that the Master of Time was killed, the members of the Sentinel team took action. Other than Oda AI, the other four surrounded Xiao Tan as fast as they could and got into a battle stance. Clearly, the preparation that Mingji Xan mentioned earlier was referring to this matter. Oh? Xiao Tan looked around cautiously and mumbled, "And here I thought you guys would wait for a while before coming. We had no choice. You were too fast," Yusuji Hito replied immediately. "Yeah." Takeda Tomoya squinted his eyes and said, "Do you think we don't want to rest a little longer? We were just afraid that you would run away." After the three of them exchanged a few words, Oda AI's expression changed slightly. She looked at her teammates in confusion and asked, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" "Heh." Xiao Tan smiled bitterly. "This posture. It's obvious, right? Can't you tell?" AI. At this time, Jishin looked at Oda AI and said, "Don't forget, this is a competition. He is our opponent." When Oda AI heard this, a complicated look flashed across her eyes. However, after a few seconds of hesitation, the confusion in her eyes quickly disappeared. Yes. Her hand once again gripped the hilt of her sword firmly. "This is a competition." Her eyes were fixed on Xiao Tan again. "Although you saved us just now, it doesn't change the fact that our two teams are enemies." "Yeah." Sasaki Akira also dragged his voice and said gloomily, "Even if we are called biting the hand that feeds us, it can't be helped. A competition is a competition. We can only apologize." "There's no need to apologize." Unexpectedly, Xiao Tan seemed to be very relaxed at this time. "I came to assassinate the god, not to save you. My action just happened to help you. You don't have to thank me for this, and you don't have to feel ashamed or guilty at this time." "Humph," Jishin snorted coldly. "You're so considerate." At this point, she had already used her eyes to signal her teammates to take action. Her hand was also on the hilt of her sword. "In that case, we won't be guests." Unexpectedly, just as she was about to finish speaking, a furry hand was placed on her shoulder. At that moment, Jishin instinctively wanted to turn around and slash someone. However, she was surprised to find that she couldn't move at all. Smack, 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 smack. Then, she heard someone smacking their lips. In the next second, Jishin turned her head woodenly and saw a bunny alien. This bunny had gray fur, only his belly, chin, and hands were white. He had 2 big ears that stood up high, a pair of bright eyes, and a pair of cute big teeth. At this moment, his right hand was resting on Jishin's shoulder, while his left hand was holding a carrot and chewing it leisurely. When Jishin's eyes met his, he said in a very casual tone, "What's up, Doc? This is Bugs Bunny?" The moment he saw the NPC's appearance, Takeda Tomo, who was standing on the other side, blurted out, Sasaki Akira's face became even more unsightly. "This scene is so stressful that my stomach is starting to hurt." "Relax, don't be nervous." Bugs Bunny looked at the people around him with a playful look and said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Barney Bugs Bunny. What do you want?" Jishin took a few seconds to regain her composure and looked at Barney. "TSK, TSK, tisk." Barney finished chewing the last bit of carrot and rubbed his fingers. "Obviously, I want to stop you from hurting my friend." He looked up at Xiao Tan. "What's your name again?" "Wang Tanji," Xiao Tan replied. "Whatever." Barney got the answer, but he waved his hand at Xiao Tan and then told Kojima, "In any case, due to various reasons, I have to help him." "You." Oda AI was standing very close to the bunny Mina, but she didn't notice how the bunny Mina had gotten close to her. "Where did you come from?" she asked after realizing what was going on. "Hey, I'm a rabbit. Of course, I came from a hole." Barney turned his head and replied, "If you don't believe me, look." As he said that, he raised his hand and pointed behind him with his thumb. Oda AI looked in the direction that the old man was pointing at and saw a hole. It was a round, black hole that was suspended in the air. In Awa and Anna's cartoons, this was a very common thing. Before Oda AI could respond, Barney said, "I didn't lie to you. Otherwise, how do you think we came to the time domain?" "You?" When he heard that word, Jishin was keenly aware of something. Xiao Tan, who was a few meters away, shrugged and said, "I also came here through that kind of cartoon dimension." As he said this, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something and pointed behind Oda AI. "Oh, and he's the same." This sentence made the Sengoku team members' hearts shocked again. If it weren't for Xiao Tan's reminder, they wouldn't have noticed. In addition to Bugs Bunny, there was another figure they didn't notice that had quietly come behind Oda AI. "Hey, I'm trying very hard to hide my presence." The next second, a bunny wearing a sailor shirt, overalls, and a red scarf suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. He complained to Xiao Tan in a complaining tone, "I wanted to suddenly jump out and scare them." PFFF. Before the bunny finished speaking, Sasaki in the distance suddenly bent over and spat out a mouthful of blood. "Hey! What are you doing now?" Takeda Tomo was shocked when he saw the gloomy man's reaction. No. "I'm sorry." Sasaki gasped back. "Pressure, too much pressure. My stomach is bleeding." Yusuji Hito frowned and pondered. "Is this the legendary Toki physique? What kind of physique is that?" Takeda Tomo couldn't help but complain. Her white-haired, pink-armored lowly image and voice are indeed very suitable for the job of complaining. "I say." Mingji Shin closed her eyes and shook her head. She sighed and said, "After you guys are done fooling around, can you consider?" Her eyes turned ferocious. "Helping me kill these guys." Chi-ing, hoo, boom. The moment he finished speaking, the sound of 4 weapons being unsheathed almost overlapped each other. The Sengoku team members who seemed to be casually playing with jokes. In fact, they were always in a state of nervous tension. They were just using this trick to cover their own psychological fluctuations and make the opponent relax their vigilance. Following Mingji Xian's command, the killing intent was rampant, and a chaotic battle was about to break out. In the blink of an eye, Oda AI flashed to Barney's side, and her katana was as fast as lightning. Aedo. Katana was skill card type. Active skill, permanent skill type. fighting effect, perform an extremely destructive and fast Iato/cooldown time, 1 hour. Can be activated when equipped with a sword-type weapon and sheathed it. Consumption: 1000 stamina points, 100 sorcery points. Learning requirement: Fighting Mastery Remark, one of the Iato jutsu created by Fiendish Swordsman. It contains the power of the 5 elements and 8 directions, and is fierce and violent. Since the Master of Time was dead, the silent domain was naturally removed. Therefore, Oda AI could now use this skill at will. By the way, in order to use this skill, Oda AI purposely put away the katana that was already out of its sheath. It was obvious that she was very confident in the reliability and lethality of this skill. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the katana cut Barney's body in half. But, oh, my God! Barney looked at his separated lower body and screamed. He covered his face with both hands. Then, like pulling up his pants, he quickly pulled up his lower body and connected it back to his waist. During the whole process, he didn't shed a single drop of blood. The part of his body that was cut only showed a smear of black, and there was no internal organs at all. All in all, after receiving the level A skill at close range, Barney was unharmed. Chapter 1090. TSK. Another troublesome guy. Oda AI saw that Barney was unharmed after receiving the attack. She snorted and swung her sword again. This time, Barney did a side flip and dodged the attack. While he was in midair, he shouted, "Hey! Calm down, buddy. AI, be careful." Due to Oda AI's attack, Nobuyuki Shinobu was able to break free from Bunnybug's suppression. She pulled out her sword to assist Nobuyuki Shinobu and said, "This rabbit's true strength is unfathomable. Don't be fooled by his appearance." I know. Oda AI replied without turning her head. "I can tell just by looking at his reaction and movements." As she spoke, her attacks did not slow down at all. Among all the NPCs I've seen, there are only a few who can reach this level of physical skills. On the other hand, a few seconds ago, when the members of Sengoku launched their attack, Shao Tan was attacked as well. Takeda Tomo, Yusuji Hito, and Sasaki Akira attacked him from 3 different directions. However, Shao Tan stood there calmly. He didn't move an inch, because he knew that the other rabbit had already taken action for him. Bunny Hair Bro rushed into the battle and shouted at Takeda Tomo's direction, the ultimate of short hair godly fist, heavenly slaughter. Before he even finished his sentence, Bro Fa's hands were already moving forward. A surge of combat chi was released from his hands and headed straight for Takeda Tomo. In the previous battle with the Master of Time, Takeda Tomo was the most heavily injured member of Sengoku. Although she could still fight, it was impossible for her to counter the attack head-on. Therefore, at this moment she could only choose to retreat and dodge. Thus, the first of the 3 was forced to retreat by Bro Fa's long-range attack. Then, Bro Fa spun his body, leaving behind layers of afterimages as he flashed to the other side of Shao Tan. He was facing Yusuji Hito and Sasaki Akira, who were charging at him from both sides. Ha! Another long shout was heard. Bunny Hair Bro spread his legs and took a horse stance. He spread his arms and drew a circle in the air. His movement was as smooth as flowing water, yet it didn't lose its fighting spirit. Short hair divine fist secret profundity, sky-breaking stance. Everyone knew that for 2D characters, it was common knowledge to announce the names of their moves during a fight. Brother Fa was no exception. What he said was really effective. Yusuji Hito and Sasaki Akira also hurriedly stopped rushing forward. Of course, they weren't intimidated by the name of the skill. Based on their battle experience, they could tell that the opponent had used a skill similar to the body-blocking skill. Furthermore, judging from the combat aura that was visible to the naked eye, the strength of the skill was astonishing. Under such circumstances, they absolutely couldn't take it head-on. Where did this rabbit come from? Cold sweat was already dripping down Usuji-ren's forehead. It's so strong. That's right, this pressure is about to break through the heavens. Sasaki Akira's expression was as if he had been constipated for a week. After thinking for a while, he suddenly added, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to use my ultimate move. Ultimate move? Usuji Hito was stunned. She looked at her teammate and asked, What ultimate move? Her confusion was understandable because Sasaki Akira's ultimate move wasn't a skill, an item, or a title ability. His ultimate move was something that couldn't be shown to his teammates in the form of data before the match. She believed that some of them had already guessed that it was the Soul's Eye. Take this, rabbit. The next second, Sasaki Akira's eyes sharpened, and he muttered in a deep voice, Double body. After he finished speaking, his figure suddenly blurred and split into two, turning into two afterimages. And the afterimage materialized in an instant, turning into two identical Sasaki Akira. Oh, that's interesting. Bunny Hair Bro saw this and his expression immediately changed. I've seen a lot of clones, but they all have a basic similarity, and that is, no matter how many clones there is only one real body. He paused. But, sir, this move you actually split into two real bodies, which is really extraordinary. After listening to the NPC's comment, Usuji Hito looked at her teammate in surprise. You actually have such a trump card in the dark. It's not really a trump card. The two Sasaki Akira replied in unison. I just happened to find that, after the other self is separated, the pressure will be reduced by half. It sounds like the process of multiple personality disorder has been visualized. After Xiao Tan, a medical student, heard this, he immediately made a very accurate comment. 2. Sasaki Akira didn't answer him. They just looked at Bunny Hair Bro, who was blocking in front of Xiao Tan, and said in unison, Rabbit, you are indeed very powerful, but this is the end. Before the voice died away, the two figures moved in a completely symmetrical trajectory to Bunny Hair Bro's two sides and shouted at the same time, Kill. 16 Knights of Moonlight. This was Sasaki Akira's strongest killing move. Although this skill itself hadn't reached the level of S, but when used with the double body, the power was far more than double of the original. If one had to make an analogy, his attack this time was equivalent to two first-rate fighters using a combo skill. Moreover, these two people had the same consciousness. From this point of view, it was similar to the Holy Devil Flash Cut that Brother Ju and Ryu used together. Oh no! At the moment when Sasaki Akira made his move, Xiao Tan's mind flashed. Bro FA doesn't have a defensive skill like the Master of Time, and Sasaki Akira's attack dragon breathing technique won't be able to withstand it. No matter how I look at it, Bro FA can only use thoughtless reincarnation to dodge it. But he is standing here to protect me, and he might give up on dodging because of my presence if that's the case. Thinking of this, Xiao Tan's body moved instinctively, and he consciously made a clear sound of footsteps. His intention was obvious. He wanted to remind Brother Fa that he had already left the place, and Brother Fa could also use thoughtless reincarnation to dodge the attack. However, what Xiao Tan didn't expect was, Brother Fa didn't have any intention of dodging. At this moment, the Fist Master of short-haired Holy Fist looked calm and composed. Just as Akira Sasaki from both sides closed in, Bunny Hair Bro's legs suddenly left the ground, and his body became cross-legged in the air. Mr. Schizophrenia Samurai. Brother Fa smiled as he raised both of his hands. I'm sorry. Attacking me from both sides at the same time is an extremely unwise move. When they heard this, both Sasaki Akira were stunned. An emotion called fear doubled the pressure on him again. At least I'll let you die without any pain. As Brother Fa spoke, he had already used his killer move. Short hair, emotionless face, shattering fist. Chi, after 2 light chants, 2 fists containing soft fighting power burst out from FA's left and right hands respectively, penetrating Sasaki's second body. The 2 figures of the latter immediately froze, and his life points dropped to 0. As for his arrow on the bow slash, it was naturally stopped before it could be used. Damn it! This rabbit also has a skill with the effect of instant death. Before Sasaki's body was cold, Takeda Tomo, who was behind Xiao Tan, had already made her move. After witnessing her teammate's death, she thought to herself, Underworld Frontline actually found such a strong NPC to help them, this is cheating. Although she was depressed, Takeda Tomo still braced herself and attacked. Because she knew that the current situation didn't allow them to wait or hesitate any longer before the battle started, the 5 members of Underworld Frontline were already beaten to a pulp by the Master of Time. They only attacked Xiao Tan because they had the advantage of numbers. This battle was supposed to be a quick one. 5 versus 1, the best result was to take the head and recover on the spot. However, the interference of the 2 rabbits caused the situation of the battle to change drastically. In the blink of an eye, the situation of 5 against 1 had turned into a situation where a player with almost full HP and 2 powerful NPCs were fighting against a 5-man party with almost no HP left. Right now, Sengoku had lost one of their members, and the situation was even worse. If they stopped their attacks, then they would really have no chance at all. Damn rabbit, don't underestimate us. A few seconds later, Takeda Tomo roared and stabbed the katana in her hand into the ground. Ding! A strange, crisp sound rang, announcing that Takeda Tomo had used up her spiritual power to release the special ability of her title, Rakshasa Marquis, at the risk of dying in battle. Name: Rakshasa's Sky Pillar, a special ability type. Active consumption: 500 spiritual energy points. Effect: transform a cylindrical area with a diameter of 10 meters into the Sky Pillar. Duration: 30 seconds. Cooldown: 24 hours. When activating, a sword-type weapon that is above perfect grade and has been bound to the caster must be temporarily sealed into the subspace. A remark: all the players, NPCs, and monsters inside the Sky Pillar will not be able to use skills, items, and other special abilities. The units inside the Sky Pillar will not be killed, and they will not be able to attack. All the physical and non-physical damage and special effects that come from outside the Sky Pillar will be nullified after entering the Sky Pillar. All life forms inside and outside the Sky Pillar can freely enter and exit the area, but entering or leaving the Sky Pillar will cause them to lose 95% of their maximum life points. At first glance, this skill seemed to be a waste of both sides' time. Under the premise that they knew the effect, the people inside would definitely not take the initiative to come out, and the people outside would not take the initiative to go in. Attacking from the outside would be futile, and so would sealing both sides inside would be futile. No matter how he thought about it, this skill was not worth the huge consumption of 500 spiritual energy points. However, whether a skill was powerful or not depended on how the player used it. As long as certain conditions were met, this skill would become a godly skill. For example, sigh. She's talking to herself again. Yusuji Hito let out a long sigh. Even though she sounded like she was complaining about her teammates, her movements didn't slow down. Then I can only. She gripped the hilt of her katana with both hands and raised it. Her ultimate move was already on her katana. I'll accompany you to the end. Chapter 1091. This guy is so annoying. Oda AI grumbled in frustration after her nth successful attack. Bunny Bug's amazing dodging ability, and the fact that it could not be killed no matter how hard she tried to hit it, made Oda AI feel like she could cut through water with her sword. However, she did not dare to stop her attacks because her combat instincts told her that she could not stop suppressing Bunny Bug. If she gave Bunny Bug a chance to fight back, the situation would be very bad. AI. Amidst the intense battle, Zishin suddenly asked, "Can you hold on for 1 minute, no 40 seconds?" Oda AI completely understood the other party's intention in asking this question, because she had also seen the battle on the other side from the corner of her eye. "Ah," she replied confidently, "let alone 40 seconds, I can even hold on for 40 minutes. Even though she was bragging, her answer was very convincing. For her teammates, it was undoubtedly a kind of mental boost. "Okay." Zishin heard her and retreated. He turned around and ran towards the light pillar that was about 10 meters away. "I'll be right back." At the same time, on Wang Tongji's side, "Be careful, kid." The first thing Bunny Bug did after he was trapped in the light pillar was to remind Xiao Tan, "If you leave the pillar's range, you will be severely injured." After he said that, Xiao Tan, who was close to the edge of the pillar, quickly stopped. "But standing in the pillar, it seems like we can't do anything. Isn't this just waiting for death?" "Don't worry, the people outside won't be able to hurt us for now," Brother Fa replied. Without a doubt, Brother Fa knew the specific effects of Rakshasa's heavenly pillar. In the next 10 seconds, he used the most concise words to inform Xiao Tan of the special effects of this move. "So, that's how it is." Xiao Tan heard that and immediately turned his gaze to Yasuji Hito, who was standing outside the pillar of light. "Then, if I'm not mistaken, that person has been preparing some kind of ultimate attack." His speculation was correct. Among the 5 members of the Sengoku First Team, Yasuji Hito's weapon was the longest. It was called Kujiki no Tsurugi no Tsurugi. It was a katana with a net length of more than 1.6 meters. The length of this weapon was clearly enough to change the nature of the weapon itself. For example, if you were to use a kitchen knife with a normal length to cut vegetables, and if you were to use a kitchen knife with a blade twice the length of a normal kitchen knife to cut vegetables, the technique used, the strength required, the posture, and so on were all poles apart. The fixed length was such a unique weapon. It could not be used as an ordinary katana, nor could it be used as a growth-type weapon. Although Yasuji Hito now had the physical attributes of a level 50 character and had done a lot of practice, she still couldn't use this legendary weapon very skillfully. Generally speaking, she could only display about 60% of her fixed power in a normal weapon station. However, Yasuji Ren still insisted on using this sword as his main weapon and used it throughout the competition. One of the reasons was because the fixed length had a skill that could be used together with Takeda Tomo's Rakshasa Black Sky Pillar. Name: Kujiki no Tsurugi no Tsurugi. Type: Weapon Equality. Legendary Attack Power. Extreme Attribute. Fire as Special Effect. Space Splitting Slash. After accumulating power for 24 seconds, the user will use up all their stamina and spiritual energy to perform a slash. The power of the slash will be proportional to the stamina and spiritual energy consumed. Note: after accumulating power, even if the slash is interrupted, the corresponding consumption will still be deducted. Equip Requirement: Fighting Mastery A, height higher than the length of the sword, level 40 and above. Note: this is the unique weapon of the Setsurugi family, a famous martial arts family. When used to the highest level, the user can sweep away thousands of enemies and look down on all enemies. It was not hard to see that the activation requirement for space splitting slash was very, very strict. Taking a step back, even if the skill was successfully used, if it missed, then the user would be in a dangerous state where they had no stamina and spiritual energy left. To put it in simpler terms, this skill was very hard to sink. During the sinking process, the user could be interrupted or killed. If the target was missed, the user would die. In conclusion, this was a very impractical skill. But as a skill that came with a legendary weapon, this skill naturally had its own uniqueness. And that was power. Most of the skills in Thriller Paradise were instant cast, and those skills that needed to be channeled, like Dragon's Slash, usually had very shocking destructive power. Then, looking at space splitting slash, this skill consumed a lot of energy and took a long time to prepare. It was almost to the point where one would lose confidence in it. With this kind of cost, the power that it showed in the end was undoubtedly at the level of God slaying. Even if the Master of Time was standing there before his barrier was broken, there was a high chance that his defense would be broken and he would be beaten into a near-death state. However, the Lord of Time would not allow his opponents to complete their channeling for 24 seconds. He would definitely interrupt them. Even if Takeda Masashi and Yusuji Hito used a combination of Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar and the space-splitting slash against the Lord of Time would be able to pause time between Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar's disappearance and a space-splitting slash's arrival. Then, he would be able to dodge the Lord of Time's attack for 12 seconds. Of course, there was a more extreme situation. That was, the players used this combo on the Master of Time during the cooldown period. In that case, the Master of Time also had a solution. He could choose to sacrifice 95% of his life points and walk out of the range of Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar. After all, he had a self-healing ability. As long as he retreated from the side away from the players, before the players came back to chase after him, he would have recovered quite a lot of life points. Furthermore, he had the Divine Power Barrier and the Field of Silence. To finish him off, the other three players, other than Yusuji Hitoshi and Takeda Masashi, had to go around Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar in time after discovering the Master of Time's intention. They had to use at least an A-level attack on the Master of Time. That was not a normal skill. Only then would they be able to finish off this boss. There were too many restrictions and variables in this strategy. The slightest mistake would cause all the previous efforts to be wasted, and one careless move would cause them to lose everything. Without careful discussion or practice beforehand, the Sengoku players naturally would not be able to use this strategy. However, the situation in front of them was different. Wang Tanji and Bunny Hair Bro, these two, did not have the divine passive skill that the Master of Time had. If the two of them were to be hit by sky-splitting slash, then they would definitely be killed instantly. And if they were to leave the range of Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar, they would be intercepted by Zishin, who was coming from the other direction. With only 5% of life points left, Zishin would not hesitate to use some attacks that were extremely difficult to dodge. After all, Zishin's goal was to reduce the target's life points by 5%. She did not need to do anything else. To make an analogy, this was like playing Japanese mahjong. She had already entered the South Fourth round, and Zishin believed that as long as she played another round, she would be able to win the game. At this time, she did not need to be a big player or take a roundabout route. She only needed to pursue speed, and cards, and she would definitely be able to win. For Xiao Tan and Brother Fa, the situation after they forced their way out of Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar was like two people who only had one chip in their hand playing roulette. Although this situation was more optimistic than buying a lottery ticket, overall, there was still a high chance of them being screwed. 22, 21, 20. Takeda Tommy, who had exhausted her spiritual energy, was now lying on the ground, unable to move. However, she still looked at the light pillar on her side and silently counted the time limit of her skill. 19, 18, 17. Another person who was counting the time like her was Yusuji Hito. Sky-splitting slash. If it was used too early, it would be cancelled out by the light pillar. If it was used too late, it would be dodged by the opponent. Yusuji Hito was definitely counting the seconds. There was only one best time, and that was the moment before Rakshas's Heavenly Pillar lost its effect. What should we do? In this dire situation, Xiao Tan turned to ask Brother Fa, "Are we going to fight it head-on or?" He used his eyes to signal outside the range of the light, "Charge out to try our luck?" "Don't worry, I have a plan." The first half of Bunny Hair Bro's reply reassured Xiao Tan. However, The second half of his sentence was different, but, I'm afraid you'll have to suffer a little. What are you going to do? Xiao Tan suddenly had a bad feeling. I suggest you put your hands in front of your abdomen, palms facing outwards, and stack them together. Be prepared to receive the impact. Bunny Hair Bro didn't answer Xiao Tan's question. Instead, he gave him a direct instruction. So, Xiao Tan did as he was told and asked again. What are you going to do? Hey, Barney. Bunny Hair Bro still didn't answer. The next second, he turned around and yelled at Bunny Hair Bro, who was about 10 meters away. What's the matter, cousin? Barney's long ears weren't for decoration. He clearly heard his cousin's call and replied loudly, I'm a little busy here. As he spoke, he dodged a few more slashes. While they were talking, Takeda Tomo and Yusuji Hito's countdown was coming to an end. 8, 7, 6. Come over here and take a huge slash for me. Also, push Xiao Tan out of the attack range. Bunny Hair Bro continued to yell. 5, 4, 3. Hey, what's with push? Xiao Tan narrowed his eyes and looked at Brother F.A. Besides, you guys are rabbits, not cows. What are you going to use to push? Before he could finish complaining, Barney had already replied, Okay, no problem, when do we switch hands? 2, 1, okay. Brother F.A. continued, now. As soon as he finished his sentence, the sword flashed. The slash arrived and the pillar of heaven shattered. In the blink of an eye, something that no one had expected happened. Bunny Hair Bro, who was in front of Xiao Tan, and Bunny Hair Bro, who was about 10 meters away, switched positions. Brother F.A. suddenly appeared at Barney's previous position. He raised his hand and caught Oda AI's slash with his bare hand. Barney replaced Brother F.A. and appeared in front of Xiao Tan. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Once Barney completed the switch, the sharp edge of air-splitting slash brushed against his rabbit tail, but he did not care about the damage to his body. The second his body was sliced open, he leaped up and used a flying knee on Xiao Tan, who was inches away from him. This was the most shameless and effective attack in Double Dragon 2. Anyone who had used it would know that. At that moment, Xiao Tan finally understood why Brother F.A. told him to be prepared for the impact. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Tan was sent flying by Bunny Hair Bro's flying knee. His speed was so fast that Mingji Xian couldn't catch up with him even if he wanted to. Ugh! At that moment, Xiao Tan felt his vision go dark. He groaned and lost control of his body. Before he lost consciousness for a moment, the last thing he saw was Barney being hit by a flaming energy slash that was as wide as a shark's fin. About 10 seconds later, Xiao Tan came back to his senses after a series of ringing and dizziness. He endured the pain of his broken arms, from his palms to his shoulders, stretched out his body to withstand the wind pressure, and used his feet as brakes, stepping on the Millennium Disc to slow down. Just like that, he retreated another 100 meters before he finally regained his balance. The action of treating his wounds had become instinctive. Even though his hands were hurting like crazy, he could still take out some medicine from his inventory to treat his wound. During the process, even though he knew he was far away from his original position, he didn't let his guard down. Almost as soon as he regained his balance, he activated his eagle eye vision and looked at the battlefield. 2 seconds later, the scene that entered Xiao Tan's sight gave him quite a shock. Chapter 1092. Barney, who had been torn in half by the shockwave from space-splitting slash, when Xiao Tan turned around to look at him, he had already recovered. At this moment, he was standing with his legs crossed. He had one hand on Zishan's shoulder, and the other hand was holding a carrot that came out of nowhere and putting it into his mouth. Judging from the shape of his mouth, he was saying to the captain of Sengoku, "What's up, Doc? How is this possible?" Zishan was shocked and angry at the familiar scene. Just like last time, she couldn't move because of Bugs Bunny's hand on her shoulder. Even the four pillar gods can't come out unscathed after being hit by this kind of slash. Tisk tisk. Barney chewed on the carrot and laughed. You're right, buddy. But, in a real battle, your comparison is meaningless. At this moment, Takeda Tomo and Yusuji Hito were lying on the ground because they had exhausted their spiritual power and physical strength. Therefore, when Barney spoke, he seemed very relaxed and did not speak quickly. If I have to make an analogy, the defensive power of the four pillar gods is like hard metal, and I'm just a piece of plastic. Barney explained leisurely. In the face of most attacks, metal has a better performance than plastic. But there is one exception, and that is when you encounter HF, hydrofluoric acid. He paused and looked at Zishin. Your companion's attack is like HF. It can even corrode metal, but it doesn't work on plastic. You. Zishin reacted when she heard this. Slash doesn't work on you? Ha! Barney laughed but didn't say anything. He didn't give her a definite answer because he didn't want to be passive when they met again. In fact, Barney wasn't immune to slashes. If he was really immune to slashes, he wouldn't have needed to dodge during the fight with Oda AI. Barney's real characteristic was that he was immune to slashes that were above a certain level of speed and strength. In other words, when he encountered slashes that weren't too fast or too strong, he would still be injured. It was just that, he could easily dodge that kind of slash with his body technique, so it was impossible for him to get hit. You know enough, Barney said. Then, please return to your own world, traveler from another world. After saying that, he took out a hammer that was even taller than himself from behind. Yes, from behind him. The hammer had the words 1T 1 ton written on it. Mingji Shin had no idea how to counter Bugs Bunny's one-handed suppression ability, so she could only stand there and watch as Bugs Bunny swung his hammer. Bang! After another explosion, another Warring States player was declared dead. Then, next, Barney killed Kojishin and carried the hammer on one shoulder. He turned to look at Takeda Masashi and Yusuji Hito. I'll send you guys off too. At the same time, beside Bunny Hair Bro, damn it. Seeing her teammates being killed one by one, Oda AI's heart burned with anxiety and anger. However, the Bunny Hair Bro in front of her did not give her the chance to leave. You're very strong, girl. Brother FA had activated dragon breathing technique and thoughtless reincarnation at the same time, so he could dodge and block with ease. Unfortunately, you rely too much on your fighting instincts, and it has become a burden for you. What are you blabbering on about? I don't understand. Oda AI was not interested in listening to Brother FA's advice. She was a typical action-oriented person. Instead of stopping to think, she would rather attack a few more times. Haha. Brother FA smiled. Then I'll be more specific. While he was dealing with the attacks, he said slowly, in terms of close combat, you have a very high talent. Things that a normal person would need a short period of time to understand, you've already figured it out based on your instincts. To put it simply, you're a genius. He paused for half a second before continuing. But even a genius needs to work hard. Perhaps you don't need to think, but that doesn't mean you cannot think. The latter is a very bad habit and you've already formed it. Nonsense. Oda AI was not convinced. If I can win by not thinking, why do I have to think? Because those who think will be stronger. Brother FA replied calmly. At this moment, Oda AI's expression changed. She heard something from Brother FA's words, that's right. Brother FA also noticed the change in Oda AI's expression. He immediately added, I am also a genius. His tone was very calm, without any hint of bragging or exaggeration. I'm known as the most talented man in the short-haired godly fist in the past 2,000 years. As he spoke, his do-chi started to increase. But a genius doesn't mean you can become a master. Along with the increase in Do Qi, there was also a surge of murderous intent. There are many powerful people in this world, and there are many who can be called a genius. But the number of true first-class martial artists can be counted with one's fingers. Those who can be called masters are even rarer. When Brother Fa said these words, Oda Ai's attacks became even more intense. This was because her fighting instincts told her that something bad was about to happen. Or rather, it was already happening. In terms of destructive power, speed, and techniques, perhaps your strength is already above mine. Brother Fa was leisurely moving around his opponent's blade. But, as a martial artist, your realm is too far away from mine. In my opinion, you're just a beginner. He shook his head. Even if you have amazing strength, without the perfect technique, it's all for naught. These words, to the arrogant Oda Ai, was the biggest slap in the face. But she was speechless because she knew in her heart that what Brother Fa said was the truth. Of course, I've said so much, you won't be able to understand it in such a short time. Brother Fa seemed to have said everything he wanted to say. So, I'll let you experience the gap between us as martial artists. As he said this, his Do Qi exploded, and his ultimate move was revealed. Brother Fa stretched out his arms in front of his chest and shouted, "Short Hair's emotional quick-breaking fist." He finished his words, and so did his moves. Brother Fa's body appeared behind Oda Ai as if he had teleported. Oda Ai just stood there, motionless. There's actually... She stared blankly in front of her and muttered, "This kind of thing." Puff 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 puff. Half a second later, a burst of Do Qi exploded on Oda Ai's body like firecrackers. She felt like she was punched dozens of times in an instant. She flew backward and her life points dropped to 0. Chapter 1093. 50 minutes after the invasion started, inside the game space. Shopping Center, Area 101. Phew. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Looking at the remains that disintegrated into data, Atobi wiped the blood from his face and gave a long sigh. He started to laugh. Finally, they've all been killed. Ha ha. Atobi's crazed reaction was understandable because he had just escaped from a suffocating battle. Other than him, the members of Brahma, Red Cherry, Jiang Hu, and Unit 2 who were in the same area all showed expressions of relief. In the past half an hour, the members of these first-rate teams worked together for the first time and exhausted all their energy to eliminate a total of 5 giants. This group of giants also had a special name, Devourers. The difference between the Devourers and Sweepers was that the Devourers weren't original data soldiers. They were created through the fusion of other redundant soldiers. Normally speaking, 300 normal soldiers combined in data form to create one Devourer. The combat ability of the Devourer was determined by the combined strength of the soldiers. If there were Sweepers mixed in with the combined soldiers, then their combat ability would be counted as well. In conclusion, this was a very powerful data soldier, and they were the trump card of the Red Cherry Army. Even though the top players from Area 101 had successfully eliminated 5 Devourers, they had paid a heavy price. Frost Monarch's Nameless 3 were the first to die. They contributed greatly during the battle against the first invader. It could be said that they risked their lives to discover many of the invader's characteristics. Red Cherry Blossoms Tai Haitang and Hyacinth, Second Order's Invincible Champion, Fearless Champion Yi Ji, and World of Martial Arts Bladeless Swordsman were all killed during the battle against the second and third invaders. By then, the players had basically figured out how to deal with the Devourers, and there were only 2 Devourers left. Therefore, the battle that followed was relatively simple. Even when all 5 Devourers were killed, the death toll did not increase. However, overall, the losses from this battle were quite heavy. The only team that had not lost a single member was the Godkillers. Only 4 of them had come. The other teams had all suffered different degrees of losses. Sigh. Why can't I laugh at all? Looking at the laughing Atobi, Barcode raised the sniper rifle in his hand, sat down on the ground, and sighed. This ace sniper of Order Studio was now the only surviving member of Order Team 2. At this moment, his mood could only be described as lonely as the snow. All of you have worked hard. Asking the Heavens immediately turned to the non-professional players outside the battlefield and said, "Thank you." He wasn't trying to win people's hearts by saying this. Instead, he was expressing his heartfelt gratitude. Just now, when the 5 professional teams had joined hands to fight against the Devourers, the other players in Area 101 had spontaneously joined forces to help them block off the normal soldiers and sweepers outside the perimeter, clearing away any worries that might arise from the rear. Without the help of these players, this battle would have been even more tragic or even a crushing defeat. What are you talking about? If it weren't for you guys blocking those giants, we would have already lost all hope. That's right, we only did what we could. Just as Asking the Heavens finished, the passers-by who were closer to him very politely represented the majority of the players to respond to the leader of Jiang Hu. By then, the emotion of fear had basically disappeared from the players' hearts, and in its place was a sense of accomplishment from surviving a disaster. Humans were highly adaptable animals, and fear was something they could adapt to. For example, a horror movie could scare you once or twice, but after you watched it 3 times, 5 times, or even 10 times, the feeling of fear would fade away. But after you watched it 100 times, the fear would completely disappear, because when you watched it 101st times, you knew what would happen in the next second. In other words, the unknown would become the known. Without the unknown, there would be no fear. This was adaptation. Similarly, when faced with a sudden threat, a human's psychological reaction was the same. Fear would make people feel shocked and helpless, and at that time, instinct would replace thought and take over a person's actions. Instinct was a valuable asset that a creature obtained during the process of evolution. It was one of the guarantees that a species could survive and reproduce. Most of the creatures in the food chain would have a similar reaction when they encountered an unknown danger. Run, hide, observe, test. Humans were no exception. The development of technology and maturity of cognition did not change our instincts that much, but fortunately, as a highly intelligent creature, humans could overcome their instincts through training. In a perilous situation, individuals who had more experience in overcoming fear would adapt to the situation faster than other individuals. They only needed a short time to let their thinking return to the high ground occupied by their instincts and play a very good role in leading the way. Author's note: Feng Bujue should be excluded from this group of people because the high ground in his mind was occupied by thought for a long time, and instinct could only wait at the mountainside. As long as there was a small group of people, or even one person, who could quickly make the correct reaction based on thought, they would have a chance to influence all of their kind around them. This was because imitation was an important part of human adaptability. When they saw someone of their kind do something and come out unscathed, their fear of the thing would decrease, and they would feel that they could do the same thing to a certain extent. The situation at Area 101 was similar to that. With the leadership of a small number of elite players, the normal players soon tossed their fear to the back of their minds and joined the battle. Facing the hopeless situation, no one gave up and no one ran. In the end, they successfully wiped out all the anomalies that had invaded the area. It was worth mentioning that, in this battle, 2 groups of people played a key role. The first group was an organization that wore white trench coats and had the word Shang written in blood on the back, Shang's personal guards. The other group was an organization that wore blue trench coats and had the word Shang written in blood on the back, Su Hui Shang's official fan club. The nature of these 2 groups could not be more obvious, and there was not much to introduce. Among the large group of non-professional players, these 2 groups were practically suicide squads. After the appearance of the first invader, most of the normal players had retreated. Only these two groups of people were completely unmoved. They stayed behind the 5 strong teams. Actually, it was only Red Sakura's team, and they were determined to fight until the end. Regardless of their motivation, their actions had truly inspired the players around them. Their attitude of facing death with equanimity boosted the morale of the crowd, and they barely managed to maintain the defense line that was on the verge of collapse. It had to be said that, in the victory of this battle, a certain female player had contributed greatly. In conclusion, after a series of epic battles, this area finally returned to peace. And this moment of safety was undoubtedly the result of everyone's hard work. For the normal players, the feeling they had at that moment was like a group of new recruits who had just participated in their first battle. Just surviving was enough for them to change their temperament greatly. In the future, when they faced similar situations, they would be able to adapt much faster. In real life, this was the difference between a veteran and a new recruit. It was this kind of adaptability that decided whether you would be stunned or not. Trust me, most of the time, the one who was stunned would die. Then, here comes the question. After a moment of silence, Shiva looked at the people around him and asked, "Is this the end?" As he spoke, he raised his eyes to look at the border of the area. At that moment, other than the dome, even the walls around the mall were torn open. Even from afar, one could see the twisted space formed by data streams clearly. When the 3rd, 4th, and 5th giants came in, they destroyed most of the outer wall of the area. Even the elevator doors to the login space were destroyed. How are we supposed to return? Shiva asked. In any case, we cannot force our way out, Brahma quickly replied. I tried that earlier. And those players who are dead are still unreachable. Black, White, Gray scratched their chin and said, "Could it be?" At that moment, a very bad thought crossed Su Huaishang's mind. The system wants us to kill each other until there is only one person left? Her words caused everyone present to suck in a breath of cold air. Fortunately, what happened in the next second disproved her hypothesis. Buzz. At that moment, all the players heard a strange hum, and their vision was blinded by white light. The feeling that followed was similar to teleportation but slightly different, but the players could not pinpoint the difference. About 5 seconds later, when the players regained their senses, they were already in a new space. This was not a shopping mall, but a white, boundless world. The sky and ground before them were both pure white. The whole sky was like an unreachable ceiling, glowing with a moderate amount of light. On the white ground, there were many sceneries of different sizes. There were skyscrapers, forests, mountains, rivers, and so on. These sceneries were all pure white. There were only silhouettes and no details. Some of them stood there like giant geometric blocks. Other than these sceneries, there were many smaller objects in this space, such as cars, lampposts, merry-go-rounds, dressers, bathtubs. These countless objects were also white silhouettes, and there was no pattern to them. It was as if they were randomly picked out from an encyclopedia, and they were evenly scattered on this white ground. Isn't that weighty words from heaven and earth? Oh right, there is also sad fruit. That is autumn breeze from mountains and rivers, right? Hey, that is one of the 4 heavenly kings. Jiang, who's Blade Runner and not a scaredy cat, were they in the same area as us earlier? Wow! I see Goddess Su. Am I dead? Is this heaven? Not long after the teleportation ended, the players realized something. It seemed like the survivors from the various shopping centers had all been sent to this strange space. Just as the players were still scratching their heads in confusion, boom, 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 rhythmic and heavy footsteps were heard from all directions, and the ground beneath the players' feet trembled as well. What's going on? Are there more giants? Ah, over there. Over there too. Indeed, these sounds and tremors were the footsteps of the invaders. At this moment, There were 4 devourers running towards the 3,000 players from 4 different directions. TSK. Who's afraid of you? F***CK. If you don't like it, then let's fight. They don't come with good intentions. Everyone, prepare for the attack. The players who were able to stand there alive were all strong players who had survived the battles in various areas. Even though not every sector was attacked by multiple invaders, the redundancy tracked their targets by sniffing data, and Sector 101 had a large amount of powerful data, so the number of invaders was the highest, while the other sectors only had 1 invader at most. Everyone present was confident that they could withstand the assault of the 4 giants. However, they misunderstood one thing. The 4 invaders weren't charging at the players, but rather bang 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 bang. However, before the invaders even got close to the players, they had already leaped into the air. They jumped at almost the same time, and they jumped very high. When they reached the highest point, the 4 invaders moved at the same time and self-destructed. What are they doing? Are they setting off fireworks? If they want to self-destruct, they should be closer. Jumping so high won't affect us at all. In the first 3 seconds, the players were still wondering what the giants were up to until the 4th second. The 4 light sources in the sky suddenly turned into 4 streams of light and converged toward the center. Hum, boom, then the players heard 2 loud noises. The first was a long hum. The second sound was a loud explosion. Along with the sound, a tsunami-like sound wave swept out and pressed down on the players. Even though the players quickly raised their hands to cover their ears, the sound wave still caused their eardrums to hurt and their legs went weak. Some of the players with lower life points were turned into white light by the sound wave. This is bad. 12 seconds later, the explosion stopped. Shiva, who was kneeling on one knee, resisted the dizziness and lifted his head to look at the sky. At this moment, about 100 meters above the ground, where the 4 streams of light had converged, a spherical spatial crack with a radius of about 20 meters had appeared. It looked as deep as a black hole in all directions, and the edges of the sphere were surging with electric light. Shiva had a deep impression of this thing. In fact, before he raised his head, he had already guessed what he was going to face. It's the explosion tunnel again. Chapter 1094. Compared to the explosion tunnel opened by Loot during tournament for the best one, the tunnel that appeared before the players this time was more perfect in terms of data structure. Just as Link said, the bandwidth of this tunnel is enough for any data to pass through. In other words, the data that passed through this tunnel did not need to undergo self-degeneration like Loot did last time to compress their power. This time, they arrived at their peak condition. After the explosion stopped, Toby looked up at the sky and grumbled, Hey, it feels like something bad is coming." However, since the players around him were still in a state of tinnitus, no one heard him. TSK. No matter what it is, it's definitely not friendly. As a first-class sniper, Barcode had already raised the weapon in his hand and aimed at the sky. The moment we rush out of the tunnel is a sure hit opportunity. His analysis was correct. No matter who it was, if they were ambushed the moment they passed through space, they would have a hard time evading it. Therefore, Barcode had high hopes for this shot. He unleashed his only S-rank skill. Name, Philosophical Cannon Skill Card Attribute, Active, Permanent Skill Type, Marksmanship Effect. Activate a Philosophical Sniping, must be activated with a sniper rifle, cooldown of 10 hours. Consumption. Not only is there no consumption, it will allow you to understand some philosophy. Learning requirement. Marksmanship S remark. The designer of this skill has been fired due to various reasons. According to rumors, he is currently on a strange lecture tour in India, and he is very popular. Barcode had no idea who or what would be the first to rush out of the tunnel, but he was willing to gamble with this gun. If this philosophy cannon only hit an ordinary redundant soldier, it would be the will of the heavens. but if it hit the enemy's vanguard and heavily injured or killed him instantly, then the gamble would be worth it. Buzz buzz. Soon, following the sound of energy, a face poked out from the explosion tunnel. The moment it showed itself, Barcode pulled the trigger and activated his skill. How can the light of day know the darkness of night? These words were not shouted out by Barcode himself. Instead, they were shot out from the muzzle of his gun. The skill philosophical cannon was just like that. Every time this skill was activated, the muzzle would randomly spit out a famous quote from a philosopher, and it would turn into an invisible shockwave that blasted towards the target. Although the form of this skill was very strange, its effect was absolutely powerful. Although it wasn't written in the skill description, this skill had at least 4 hidden characteristics. First, it could be fired without reloading. Second, it didn't generate any heat or recoil after firing. Third, it couldn't be dodged when attacking sentient targets. Fourth, it couldn't be blocked by any tangible or intangible defense. Not to mention, this move also had the advantage of being powerful and consumption-free. In summary, this S-rank skill was undoubtedly worthy of its name Chi, in the blink of an eye. A second later, Infinite, who had just revealed his upper body from the explosion tunnel, had his face covered in philosophy. After being hit, his head suddenly exploded, shattering into flashing data fragments that scattered like exploding fireworks. And that was not all. Almost at the same time, Infinite's body was also attacked by dozens of long-range attacks. These attacks varied in strength and form, and they came from many different directions. It looked like Barcode was not the only one who wanted to make the first move. Many of the players in the tunnel had also realized this. Did it work? It should have worked. Looks like it's not a small fry. That's great, we took out one of the enemy's officers. The players who looked up to see this scene, although they still couldn't communicate well with words, their thoughts were generally the same. The guy who rushed out of the tunnel first had been taken care of. But, the way you guys greet each other is really rough. A moment later, a figure flashed out from the edge of the tunnel and said to the people below in a mocking tone. It was a man who was dressed like a 19th-century English gentleman. His face, everyone recognized it because when the hyperdimensional invasion began, this anomaly who called himself Link had already shown his face in front of everyone. Yes. On the other side, in less than 2 seconds, a new head grew out from Infinite's empty neck, and he said in a calm tone, "When I poked my head out, I heard day does not understand the darkness of night," and then there was a rain of bullets. As he said that, he floated out from the explosion tunnel and hovered in the air. This is really too rude. Preposterous. He even put on a very arrogant look. He can still regenerate without a head. This self-healing speed has never been seen before. At this time, most of the players' hearing had basically recovered, so quite a number of them heard the conversation between Link and Infinite. Although everyone knew that the two anomalies before them were very strong, but with the current situation, they still underestimated the enemy's strength. Because of that, their fighting spirit was still very high. The guy next to Link, Shiva, raised his head to look at the sky and thought to himself, should be the Infinite that Feng Bujua mentioned. Even though Brother Ju had described the general strength of the two to him, Shiva did not fully believe it, because what Brother Ju said at the time sounded too exaggerated to Shiva. If there are only 2 of them, there should be a way. The next second, Shiva had already come up with a battle plan in his mind. I've seen many monsters with self-healing power. No matter how crazy their self-healing power is, there should be a core inside their body. As long as I can find and destroy that core, no matter how strong the self-healing power is, it will be useless. As he thought about that, he summoned the heavenly hourglass. For now, I should use a more powerful general attack to force him to reveal his weakness, and then I'll use the Eye of Destruction to finish him off. With that in mind, he immediately opened his mouth and said to his teammates, "Your hearing has recovered, right?" "Yes, it has recovered a long time ago." Yamaraja was the first to reply. "Boss, you have an idea, right?" Brahma asked. "I'll be on standby," Vishnu added. "Okay." Shiva looked at the sky and ordered in a low voice, "Since everyone is ready, then let's use that combo skill." Chapter 1095. On the other hand, just as the battle in the white space began, on the other end of the explosion tunnel, in the overclocking matrix area of the inner world, there was also a change in the silver sky. A stream of light suddenly flashed. This light was composed of two colors, one green and one red. It was like two intertwined ribbons, tearing the sky apart. Aida, who saw this scene, just said in his usual calm tone, "It's finally here," as he spoke. He had already raised his right arm and aimed at the rapidly approaching two-colored stream of light with his palm. What a pity! Even though the content of his words was regretful, Aida's tone remained unchanged. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying energy burst out from his palm. This energy itself had no color or shape, but it could be seen with the naked eye because every inch of space was torn and shattered wherever it passed. If space was regarded as a huge solid made of countless small cubes, then Aida's attack was like a high-pressure water gun, breaking the whole solid into piles of small cubes again. "Why do you say it's a pity?" At the same second, a woman's voice sounded from behind Aida. Aida replied calmly, "Two powerful compatriots died in front of you, isn't it a pity?" "Humph," the woman's voice replied, "you'd better see it clearly." Before she said the word speak, the energy and the stream of light in the sky had already approached each other. However, at the moment when they were about to touch, the stream of light suddenly split into two and flashed to both sides, narrowly avoiding the impact. Immediately afterward, the separated red and green light fell to the ground rapidly. "So that's how it is." Ed saw a development that was beyond his expectations, but he didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. It was as if, the moment the accident happened, he had already turned it into an accepted fact, and then began to think about the next step. "It seems that you're really good at teaching." Aida said, turned his head and looked at Lute standing behind him. With their data strength, it's reasonable to say that they can't perform an emergency escape in this semi-teleportation mode. But you provided them with a very good algorithm that allowed them to do things beyond their limit. Bang bang. 5 seconds later, 2 trembling sounds rang out simultaneously, and 2 figures landed dozens of meters away from Aida. As soon as they landed, a tornado-like data burst around them, spiraling into the air like 2 white dragons. When the light storm dissipated, the figures of red and green were revealed. Compared to the last time Feng Bujua saw them, Qi and Qing looked a few years older. They looked like they were 12 or 13 years old. The style of their battle suits had also changed. Although they were still tight-fitting, they looked more suitable for moving around than before. As for the colors, of course they were still red and green. Hey! The guy over there who looks like the door sign of the men's room. You are very arrogant. Qi's temper seemed to be more explosive than when she was young. You launched that attack without saying anything. She turned sideways and pointed at Aida. In other words, if I hit you with an attack of similar power, you won't have any complaints, right? Another mutant with an extreme personality circuit. Aida didn't pay attention to her. His attention was mainly on Lute. The old you would never accept such a person under your command. He paused. You said it yourself, that's a stupid thing that only people from Z organization would do. That was then and this is now, Lute replied. I'm very different from back then. Indeed, the current Lute, whether in terms of appearance, personality, or strength, was very different from the Lute during the tournament for the best S1. Although her beauty was still so flawless, the temperament between her eyebrows was no longer like a CG character. Instead, she was more like a human. Her personality had also become richer. The inherent thinking pattern based on right and wrong and rationality had gradually faded away, and her strength had also reached an unprecedented level. Even Aida couldn't tell how strong Lute was now. It looks like, Aida continued, you and I have gradually drifted apart on the path of evolution, and the differences in our ideologies eventually brought us to this opposing situation. It's not too late now. You can choose not to be our enemy, Lute replied. You have no reason to fight us to the death here. Sorry, I don't agree with this statement, Aida replied in a cold tone. In my opinion, everything that happens in all worlds and time is inevitable. There is no such thing as late or not late, because that statement means unnecessary possibility. He shook his head. I, as an individual with independent thoughts, firmly believe that that kind of thing is very absurd, and those who choose to accept such absurd creatures, in my opinion, are incomplete and unreasonable, such as humans, and you in front of me. Hey, it's fine if you ignore me, but you're still scolding me indirectly. Red heard Aida's words from afar, and couldn't help but jump up and yell. Scolding me indirectly is not how you use it, Qing, who didn't like to talk much, said coldly to Red. He's not beating around the bush. He's saying it very directly. What do you mean by I? He's saying we, okay? Red turned around and yelled at Qing. On the other side, Aida still ignored them and continued to talk to Lute. It's not a coincidence that I'm standing here today. I know when the generator is activated, the location of the tunnel will be exposed, and you will definitely come here to destroy the generator. So, the battle between us is inevitable. No, you still have a choice. Lute replied, every one of us has a choice. If you're right, then have you ever thought about the possibility? Aida paused for half a second and said, maybe. I've already made my choice. You. Lute seemed to have understood something and her expression became complicated. I can't accept your philosophy, just like you can't accept mine. Aida quickly added, and I won't be like you, begging or forcing others to accept my philosophy. Because I know each of our subjective choices are actually not important. What's important is the objective mission that we bear. As he spoke, he was already increasing his data strength to prepare for the battle. I don't mind being the loser. Failure is the cornerstone to victory. Mistakes are the basis for judging right. When Aida said that, Lut was also increasing her power, but the gap between them was still huge. I don't mind being the winner, and after I win, I'll shoulder the corresponding responsibility. He paused for 2 seconds. In any case, whether it's you, me, or anyone else, it's inevitable that we'll reach the end. At this point, his energy began to increase exponentially, and the ground of the entire area began to tremble under his might. Qi and Qing, who were still bickering with each other just a moment ago, no longer made a sound. Instead, their faces were solemn. Victory represents the right. Aida's voice was still emotionless. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. But no matter what, I'll play my role well and follow my own philosophy. I'll do my best. Humph. At this time, Lut laughed. I finally understand. From a certain perspective, you are indeed more perfect data than zero. Although there was a smile on her face, her tone was full of sadness. Just like your name, Administrator, your perspective of things is already in a higher dimension than the system. I'm afraid I'll never be able to reach your level. That's fine, Aida said calmly. Now, what you need is not the level but power. After that, energy exploded. Suddenly, you're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.